Hello there everyone, welcome to Shadowman Stories. I am your storyteller and I'm here to guide you tonight. I know many of you use these videos to drift off to sleep, so before we begin, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. I'm always curious, where are you watching from and what time is it in your part of the world? Now, find your cozy spot and relax. My name is Thomas Blackwood and I've been a park ranger for 18 years. People call me Tom. I work at Baxter State Park in Maine, where Mount Katahdin rises like a sleeping giant above the trees. Most folks know Katahdin as the end of the Appalachian Trail, but I know it as something else entirely, something that still haunts my dreams 40 years later. Back in 1973, I was 42 and thought I'd seen everything these woods could throw at me. I was wrong, dead wrong. The story I'm about to tell you happened during the worst blizzard Maine had seen in 50 years. February 1973, the kind of cold that makes your breath freeze before it leaves your mouth. 40 below zero, with winds that could knock a grown man flat. I'd been living alone since my wife Sarah died in that car accident 2 years before. The empty house felt too quiet, so I spent most of my time at the ranger station or out on patrol. Work kept the ghosts away, or so I thought. That winter, 3 experienced climbers had gotten permits to tackle Katahdin's north face. Real professionals, not weekend warriors. They had top-shelf gear and 20 years of mountain experience between them, led by a guy named Marcus Chen, a climbing instructor from Colorado. The other 2 were his students, Jenny Walsh from Vermont and Pete Morrison, a local boy from Bangor. I remember the morning they set out. Marcus shook my hand with confidence, his grip firm and sure. "We'll radio in every 12 hours, he said. "Should be back down in 4 days, max." Jenny had that eager look young climbers get when they see a challenge. She couldn't have been more than 25, with bright eyes and a smile that reminded me of Sarah. Pete was quiet, focused. He knew these mountains better than most. "Weather's supposed to hold," I told them, checking my forecast sheets. "But you know how fast things can change up there." Marcus nodded. "We've got everything we need. Emergency shelter, extra food, cold weather, gear rated for 50 below." I watched them hike toward the mountain base, their orange jackets bright against the gray morning. The Penobscot Indians who lived here first called Katahdin the greatest mountain. They also called it Pamala's home, Pamala being their mountain spirit, an angry spirit that didn't like visitors. I used to think those were just old stories. The first 2 days went fine. Marcus radioed in right on schedule, morning and evening check-ins. Their voices came through clear and strong. They'd made good time up the lower slopes and established their base camp at about 3,500 feet. Then the storm hit. It came down like God's own hammer. The wind howled so fierce it shook the ranger station windows. Snow fell so thick I couldn't see the flagpole 20 feet away. The temperature dropped 30 degrees in 6 hours. That's when the radio went quiet. I tried raising them every hour. "Base camp, this is ranger station. Marcus, you copy." Nothing but static. Then the static got weird, full of crackling sounds that almost sounded like growling. By the 3rd day, I knew something was wrong. Really wrong. These weren't rookies who'd panic at a little weather. Marcus Chen had survived avalanches in the Rockies. If they weren't answering, there was a reason. The roads were impassable. Snow had drifted 15 feet deep in places. Phone lines were down. Even the radio towers had gone silent. We were cut off from the outside world, and somewhere up on that mountain, 3 people were in trouble. I spent that night pacing the station, checking equipment, drinking coffee that tasted like mud. Every time I looked out the window toward I felt something watching me back. The mountain looked different in the storm, darker, more threatening, like it was alive. My old Marine training kicked in. You don't abandon people in the field, ever. Come morning, storm or no storm, I was going up that mountain. I should have listened to the voice in my head telling me to wait for backup. Should have paid attention to what the Penobscot elders used to say about Katahdin in winter. Should have remembered that some places are sacred for good reasons, but I didn't, and that decision changed everything. I started up the mountain at first light, following the trail the climbers had taken. The snow was waist deep and crusted hard enough to walk on in places. My snowshoes bit into the surface with each step, the sound echoing weird in the storm-muffled air. The silence was the first thing that struck me as wrong. In 18 years of winter patrols, I'd never heard quiet like that. No bird calls, no squirrel chatter. Even the wind seemed muted, like the mountain was holding its breath. I found their base camp around noon. The scene made my blood freeze colder than the air around me. Both tents had been sliced open from the outside. Long, clean cuts that went through the heavy canvas like it was tissue paper. Gear was scattered everywhere. Sleeping bags, cooking equipment, rope, all of it thrown around like a tornado had hit, but there was no wind damage. The cuts were too precise, too deliberate. I called out, "Marcus, Jenny, Pete." My voice came back as a hollow echo that seemed to go on too long. That's when I saw the tracks. Footprints in the snow, each one as long as my forearm and twice as wide. Bare feet, with 5 distinct toes. The prints were sunk deep, like whatever made them weighed as much as a small car. But here's the thing that made my hands shake around. Each footprint, the snow had melted, then frozen again into perfect ice. I followed the trail with my eyes. The prints led straight up the mountain face, across terrain that would challenge an experienced rock climber with proper equipment. Whatever had made these tracks had walked up a near vertical cliff like it was level ground. My radio crackled, to life, static, then something that might have been a voice. I pressed the transmit button. "This is Ranger Blackwood at the base camp. If anyone can hear this, the climbers are missing. I'm seeing signs of ... I stopped. Signs of what? A giant, barefoot man who could climb vertical rock faces. The radio hissed back at me. In the static, I could swear I heard something else. A sound like breathing, but too deep, too slow, like a sleeping giant drawing air. I shook my head and kept searching the camp. In Marcus's tent, I found his journal. The last entry was dated yesterday, written in a shaky hand, very different from his usual neat script. Asterisk, "Something's been following us. Started 2 days ago. We hear it at night, footsteps around the perimeter, but when we shine lights, nothing. There, Jenny thinks it's just settling snow, but snow doesn't make breathing sounds. Pete wants to abort the climb, but we're so close to the summit, we'll reassess in the morning." Asterisk, there was more, but the writing got harder to read, like his hand had been shaking worse with each word. I found Jenny's camera bag, expensive equipment scattered in the snow. Her camera was smashed, but the film canister was intact. In Pete's gear, I discovered his climbing rope, 50 feet of it, frozen solid, tied in knots I'd never seen before. The rope was stiff as steel cable, but somehow the knots were perfect, complex, like mathematical equations made of hemp. The temperature was dropping again. My breath came out in white puffs that seemed to hang in the air longer than they should. I checked my thermometer, 20 below, and falling fast. That's when I found the first body. Pete Morrison was 30 feet, up the cliff face, encased in ice from head to toe, not hanging from his rope, not pressed against the rock, standing upright on a ledge barely wide enough for his boots, arms spread wide like he was trying to balance. The ice around him was perfectly clear. I could see his face through it, eyes wide open, mouth frozen in what might have been a scream or might have been a word. His expression wasn't fear exactly, it was amazement, like he'd seen something impossible right before the cold took him. I tried to reach him, but the ice had formed over the climbing holds. The entire cliff face was covered in a sheet of ice so smooth it looked like glass. No way to climb it without specialized equipment I didn't have. "Pete," I yelled up at him, knowing it was useless. The ice-covered figure didn't move. My radio squealed with feedback. Through the noise, I heard what sounded like Marcus's voice, distant and distorted. "Tom, if you can hear this, don't come up, ... It's not what we thought." Then silence. I looked up at Pete's frozen form, then at the impossible footprints leading up the mountain. Every instinct I had told me to get back down, radio for help, wait for proper rescue equipment. But Marcus and Jenny were still up there somewhere, and the temperature was still dropping. I started climbing, following the strange footprints up a gentler slope to the east. As I climbed, I noticed something else wrong. My compass was spinning, like a top, never settling on any direction. The needle would swing to magnetic north for a second, then spin wildly before pointing at the mountain peak. Behind me, I could swear I heard footsteps, big ones, following my trail, but every time I turned around, there was nothing there but my own tracks in the snow. The sun was setting, painting the mountain blood red. I needed to find shelter soon, or I'd end up like Pete, a frozen statue staring at the sky. That's when I saw the cave. The cave entrance was hidden behind a curtain of icicles, each one thick as my arm. I had to break through them with my ice axe to get inside. The sound echoed like breaking glass, sharp and final in the mountain air. Inside, the cave was bigger than I'd expected, a natural chamber carved from the mountain's granite heart, and it wasn't empty. Marcus Chen sat against the far wall, very much alive but staring at nothing. His lips were moving like he was talking to someone, but no sound came out. When I called his name, he didn't respond. Marcus, I shook his shoulder. His eyes focused on me slowly, like he was waking from a deep dream. Tom. His voice was a whisper. You shouldn't have come. Up here. Where's Jenny? He pointed deeper into the cave. She went to find water. That was this morning, I think, or yesterday. Time's different up here. I followed his gesture and saw another tunnel leading further into the mountain. Ice covered the walls, but this wasn't natural ice. It formed patterns, spirals and curves that looked almost like writing. What happened to Pete? Marcus laughed, but there was no humor in it. Pete saw it first, really saw it. It was standing right behind our camp when he went out to check the weather. He started screaming, then he started running up the cliff. Just ... ran straight up the rock face like gravity didn't matter. Marcus, that's impossible. Yeah, that's what I thought too. He grabbed my arm, his grip desperate. Then I saw the thing that was chasing him. The cave temperature was dropping. I could see my breath, and frost was forming on my jacket. But the cold felt wrong. Not natural winter cold, but something deeper. Something that came from inside the mountain itself. We need to find Jenny and get out of here, I said. Marcus shook his head. Jenny's gone. Tom, same as Pete. Maybe different, but gone. He pulled out his radio and turned it on. Static filled the cave, but underneath it, I heard something else. Singing a woman's voice, high and sweet. Singing a song I didn't recognize. The melody was haunting, beautiful, and absolutely terrifying in that context. That's Jenny, Marcus whispered. She's been singing like that for hours. But when I call to her on the radio, she doesn't answer, just keeps singing. The singing stopped. In the silence that followed, we heard footsteps, big ones, coming from deeper in the cave. It's coming back, Marcus said. It always comes back when the sun goes down. What comes back? But I already knew. The footprints outside, Pete, frozen to the cliff. The impossible cold. It all pointed to something that shouldn't exist, but obviously did. The footsteps got closer. Each step echoed like a drumbeat, slow and deliberate. Whatever was making them was in no hurry. It knew we had nowhere to go. I pulled out my flashlight and pointed it toward the tunnel. The beam showed ice-covered walls stretching into darkness, but nothing else. The footsteps stopped. Then I heard breathing, deep, slow breaths that seemed to come from everywhere at once. The air in the cave moved with each exhale, creating a wind that carried the smell of winter itself, clean snow and ancient ice. Don't look at it directly, Marcus whispered. That's what happened to Pete. He looked right at it, and it did something to him, changed him. The breathing got closer. My flashlight beam wavered as my hand shook. At the edge of the light, I saw something move, a shadow that seemed too large for the tunnel, flowing like liquid darkness. Then it spoke. The voice was deep as mountain thunder, but it used words I'd never heard before. Ancient words that felt familiar, even though I didn't understand them. The Penobscot language my grandmother had tried to teach me as a child. It's talking to the mountain, Marcus said, asking permission. Permission for what? To hunt. The temperature dropped another 10 degrees in as many seconds. Ice crystals formed in the air, sparkling in my flashlight beam like snow that fell upward. The cave walls began to groan and crack as the cold penetrated deeper into the stone. Jenny's singing started again, but now it was coming from right outside the cave entrance. She was standing there in the icicle curtain, her voice clear and beautiful as church bells. Jenny, I called out. The singing stopped. In the sudden quiet, I heard her voice, but it wasn't Jenny talking. The words came from her mouth, but the voice was something else entirely. The mountain chooses who lives, she said in that deep, thunderous tone. The mountain chooses who dies. The mountain chooses who becomes part of the ice forever. Marcus grabbed my arm. That's not Jenny anymore. Look at her eyes. I turned my flashlight toward the cave entrance. Jenny Walsh stood there, but something was terribly wrong. Her eyes were solid blue, not the blue of a human iris, but the deep blue of glacial ice. When she smiled, her teeth were icicles. "Come outside, Tom," she said, in that voice that wasn't hers. "Come see what the mountain spirit has shown me." Behind her, a shadow moved, something massive and white, with eyes that glowed like winter. Stars, it was watching us, waiting to see what we would do. I had a choice to make: stay in the cave and freeze to death, or face whatever was waiting outside. Marcus made the choice for me. He stood up, walked to the cave entrance, and stepped outside into Jenny's arms. I heard him scream once, then the sound cut off, replaced by the crack and hiss of water rising. When I looked outside, Marcus was gone. In his place stood another ice statue, arms raised like he was trying to push something away. Jenny was gone too, but the shadow was still there, and now it was coming into the cave. I've seen a lot of things in my 42 years, but nothing prepared me for what walked into that cave. It stood 12 feet tall and was covered in fur, the color of fresh snow. Its arms were longer than a man's body, ending in hands that could palm a basketball. But it was the eyes that made my blood freeze, pale blue like winter sky, ancient and intelligent and completely inhuman. This was no animal. This was something older than the mountains themselves. The creature moved with impossible grace for something so large. Each step left footprints that instantly filled with ice. When it breathed, the air itself seemed to crystallize. It spoke again in that ancient language, and somehow I understood. The words appeared in my mind like memories I'd forgotten I had. "You trespass on sacred ground," it said without moving its mouth. "Your kind always trespasses." "I'm looking for my friends," I managed to say. "Your friends chose their fate. The one who runs chose to become part of the mountain. The one who sings chose to become my voice. The one who follows chose to become my guardian." It gestured toward the cave entrance. Through the opening, I could see Marcus, Pete, and Jenny, all of them standing in the snow, covered in ice, their eyes glowing that same winter blue. "They're alive," the creature said. "More alive than they ever were before. They see through the mountain's eyes now. They hear the voice of winter itself. Let them go. I cannot free those who have chosen to serve. But you, you have not chosen yet." The creature moved closer. With each step, the temperature dropped further. Ice formed on my clothes, my skin, my eyelashes. But I wasn't freezing to death. The cold was keeping me alive somehow, preserving me like the others. "I am Pamola," it said, "guardian of this sacred place. Your people's ancestors knew to respect the mountain. They brought offerings, asked permission, understood that some places are not for human feet. The climbers didn't know," I said. "They weren't trying to disrespect anything. Ignorance is not forgiveness. The mountain has been wounded by your kind. Steel spikes driven into stone. Sacred burial grounds disturbed by boot prints. The silence of winter broken by machines and voices." I thought about all the climbers I'd seen over the years, all the permits I'd issued. How many had climbed these slopes without knowing what they were walking on? "What do you want from me?" "Choose," Pamola said. "Become my guardian, and your friends will be returned to you. You will watch over this mountain together, keeping the unworthy away. Or refuse, and join the ice alone." I looked at my frozen friends, standing in the snow. They didn't look like they were suffering. If anything, they looked peaceful, like they'd found something they'd been searching for all their lives. But they weren't human anymore. "There's a third option," I said. Pamola tilted its massive head. "Speak." "I go back down the mountain. I tell people what happened here. I make sure they understand this place is sacred, that it needs to be respected. And if they do not listen, then I'll make them listen." The creature studied me with those ancient eyes. The cold in the cave was so intense now that my breath came out as ice crystals that tinkled when they hit the ground. "You would become a guardian of different kind," Pamola said finally, a voice of warning rather than a voice of winter. "Yes, and if you fail, if your people continue to trespass." I looked at Marcus, Pete, and Jenny. They were still standing there, waiting for Pamela's decision. "Then I'll come back. I'll take your offer then." Pamola was quiet for a long moment. The only sound was the wind howling outside the cave and the whisper of snow against stone. "You speak truth," it said finally. "I can taste it in your words. Very well, you may go. But you will carry part of winter with you always, so you never forget what you have seen." The creature reached out one massive hand and touched my forehead. The cold that shot through me was beyond anything I'd ever felt, deeper than frozen lakes, colder than the space between stars. It went through my skull and my brain, leaving something behind that I can still feel today. Go, Pamola said. Warn your people, the mountain will be watching. I stumbled toward the cave entrance. As I passed my 3 friends, Jenny turned her ice blue eyes to me and smiled. Tell them about the singing, she said in her own voice. Tell them how beautiful it is up here. Then I was outside, running down the mountain as fast as my legs could carry me. Behind me, I heard Pamala's voice one last time. Remember, Thomas Blackwood. Remember, and make them believe. I made it back to the ranger station just as the storm broke. The rescue team found me 3 days later, nearly dead from exhaustion and severe frostbite. I lost 3 fingers on my left hand and most of the hearing in my left ear, but I was alive. They searched for the climbers, of course, found their base camp, found the equipment, never found the bodies. The official report blamed equipment failure during an unexpected storm. Case closed. I tried to tell them the truth, told the investigators, the newspaper reporters, anyone who would listen. They thought I was suffering from hypothermia hallucinations, trauma from nearly dying on the mountain. The Park Service forced me into early retirement with a stress-related disability, but I know what I saw up there. I've spent the last 40 years trying to keep people away from Cotaden's North Face. Can't get it closed entirely. Too much tourist money involved. But I can make sure the right warnings get posted, the right stories get told around campfires. Most people think I'm just a crazy old ranger telling tall tales. That's fine. The ones who might actually try something stupid usually listen when I tell them about the ice blue eyes watching from the shadows. The cold Pamola left in my head never went away. Every winter, when the temperature drops below freezing, I can feel it spreading through my skull like frost on a window. I can't go into walk-in freezers or ice skating rinks. Even opening my home freezer makes my hands shake. But the worst part is the dreams. Every night, I'm back in that cave, and I can hear Jenny singing. Her voice is so beautiful, so peaceful. Sometimes I wake up wanting to go back, to accept Pamela's offer and join them in the ice. I've researched the Penobscot legends, talked to tribal elders who still remember the old stories. They all say the same thing. Pamola has been up there longer than human memory. The mountain spirit who guards the sacred places, who punishes those who show disrespect. They also say he keeps his word. 3 times over the years, climbers have gone missing on Katahdin's North Face, despite all the warnings. Each time, I've found them later, standing in the snow with ice blue eyes, perfectly preserved, waiting for orders from their master. The mountain is patient. The mountain remembers. And the mountain is still watching. I'm 82 years old now, and I don't have many winters left. When I die, there won't be anyone to warn people about what's up there. The stories will become just stories. The warnings will be forgotten. That's why I'm writing this down. Maybe someone will read it and understand that some places are sacred for good reasons. Maybe they'll stay away from the North Face when the temperature drops and the wind starts to sing. Or maybe they won't. Maybe they'll think this is just another campfire story told by a crazy old man. But if you're reading this and you're thinking about climbing Mount Katahdin in winter, remember one thing. The mountain chooses who lives and who becomes part of the ice forever. And it's always watching. Just last week, my apartment dropped to freezing for no reason the heat repairman could find. When I looked in the bathroom mirror, I saw ice blue eyes looking back at me. Jenny was smiling. "It's beautiful up here, Tom," she whispered through the glass. "So beautiful and so cold and so quiet. Don't you want to see?" "I do want to see. God help me, I really do. But not yet. Not while there are still people who need to be warned. The mountain can wait a little longer." My name is Michael O'Brien, and I've been a park ranger for 14 years. People call me Mick. I work up in Superior National Forest, right on the Minnesota-Canada border. It's beautiful country, but it can kill you if you're not careful. I've got 4 kids at home, and a wife who worries every time I head out to the remote areas. Can't blame her. These woods have swallowed up plenty of folks over the years. But someone's got to check on the hunting lodges and fishing camps, especially during the spring thaw when the ice gets dangerous. March of 1961 was one of the worst. I'd seen winter had been brutal, and now everything was melting too fast. The lakes were half frozen, half water. You couldn't trust anything under your feet. Ice that looked solid would crack and drop you into water so cold it'd stop your heart in minutes. I'd grown up poor, real poor. There were nights as a kid when I went to bed hungry, listening to my stomach growl. Maybe that's why I took the ranger job. Wanted to make sure families camping out here never faced that kind of desperation. Kept extra food in my truck, always packed more than I needed. Mum used to say, hunger makes people do terrible things. The call came in on a Tuesday morning. Old Pete at the ranger station was shaking his head as he hung up the radio. Got a problem up at Blackwater Lodge, he said. Hunting party went up there last week. Haven't heard from them since. Their families are worried sick. Blackwater Lodge sat about 40 miles north, near a chain of small lakes. It was remote even by our standards. The road up there was more like a deer trail, and in spring it turned into a muddy mess. But it was popular with serious hunters who wanted to get away from everything. When's the last time anyone checked on them? I asked. Owner said he dropped off supplies 10 days ago. Party was supposed to radio in every few days. Pete lit his pipe, something he only did when he was nervous. Weather's been bad though. Could be the radio's down. I packed my truck with the usual supplies, medical kit, rope, emergency food, spare radio batteries, added some extra cans of soup and crackers. Call it a feeling, but something told me I might need them. The drive took 3 hours over roads that were barely roads. Twice I had to get out and move fallen trees. The forest felt wrong somehow, too quiet. I'd been working these woods for years, and they usually hummed with life. Birds calling, squirrels chattering, wind in the trees. But today there was nothing, just the sound of my truck engine and the squelch of mud under my tires. When I finally reached Blackwater Lodge, I knew something was very wrong. The building looked normal from the outside: log walls, stone chimney, covered porch where hunters usually sat to clean their guns. But there were no vehicles in the parking area. The hunting party should have had at least 2 trucks. I parked near the front door and listened. Nothing, not even the sound of a radio. Playing inside. Hello, I called out. Park service. Anyone here? My voice echoed off the trees and died. I walked up to the front door and knocked. It swung open at my touch. The smell hit me first. Something rotten, sweet, and terrible. I'd smelled death. Before, deer that died in winter. Occasionally a hiker who didn't make it out, but this was different. Stronger, like meat left in the sun too long. I pulled out my flashlight and stepped inside. The main room looked like a tornado had hit it. Chairs were overturned, playing cards scattered across the floor. The dining table was flipped on its side. Dark stains covered the wooden floor. But what made my hands shake was what I found in the kitchen. Bones, human bones, scattered around like someone had been eating chicken and just threw the scraps on the floor. They'd been gnawed clean, every scrap of meat picked off. Some were cracked open, the marrow scraped out. I'd seen bear attacks before, seen what wolves could do to a deer, but the bite marks on these bones were different. Too big for any animal I knew, but too precise for a bear. They almost looked ... organized, like someone had arranged them in patterns. That's when I noticed the pot on the stove. It was still warm. I backed out of that kitchen fast, my heart hammering like a drum. The pot was warm. That meant whoever did this might still be around. I drew my service pistol, a .38, that suddenly felt very small in my hand. Park service, I called out again. I need everyone to come out where I can see you. Nothing. I checked the bedrooms one by one. Each had sleeping bags laid out, personal belongings scattered around, wallets with family photos, a thermos still, half full of coffee. Everything normal except for the fact that the people were gone. In the last bedroom, I found something that made my blood run cold. Scratched into the wooden wall, like someone had used a knife or their fingernails, were words. The hunger spreads below that, in different handwriting. God help us, we can't stop eating. I had to get out of there. Had to radio for backup, get the state police involved. This was way beyond anything a park ranger should handle alone. But when I got back to my truck, the radio was dead. Not just broken, the whole unit had been ripped out of the dashboard. Wires hung down like broken veins. I looked around the parking area more carefully. That's when I found the tire tracks leading away from the lodge, heading deeper into the forest. The tracks were fresh, maybe a few hours old, but there was something strange about them. They weaved back and forth across the muddy road like whoever was driving couldn't control the vehicle. Following those tracks meant leaving the main road, heading into country where even I rarely went. But 5 men were missing, and judging by what I'd seen in the lodge, they might not have much time left. I grabbed my emergency pack and started walking. The tracks led down a narrow trail that wound between thick pine trees. The mud was soft, and I could see footprints mixed in with the tire marks. Lots of footprints, all heading the same direction. After about a mile, the tire tracks ended where a truck had slammed into a large pine tree. The windshield was shattered, driver's door hanging open, blood on the steering wheel, but no body. More footprints led away from the crashed truck, but these prints were different. Bare feet, and some of them they didn't look right. Too long, toes spread too wide, like something pretending to be human feet, but not quite getting it right. I followed the trail deeper into the woods. The trees grew thicker, blocking out most of the sunlight. The temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. My breath came out in little puffs of fog. That's when I heard it, a low moaning sound, like someone in terrible pain. It was coming from up ahead, past a thick stand of birch trees. I found him sitting against a fallen log, rocking back and forth. He was one of the missing hunters. I recognized him from the family photo in his wallet. Jim something or other from Duluth, but he looked like he'd aged 20 years in the past week. His clothes hung on him like they were made for a much bigger man. His cheeks were sunken, eyes deep in their sockets. He was so thin I could see his ribs through his torn shirt. "Jim," I said softly, not wanting to spook him. "Jim, I'm a park ranger. I'm here to help." He looked up at me with wild eyes. "Hungry," he whispered. "So hungry, can't make it stop." I reached for the emergency food in my pack, crackers and beef jerky. "Here, take this." But when I handed him the crackers, something impossible happened. They crumbled to dust in his hands. Not like they were old or stale. They just ... dissolved, like they were being eaten by something invisible. "Won't work," Jim said, still rocking. "Nothing works. The hunger takes it all, makes it rot, makes it disappear." He grabbed my arm with fingers that felt like bird bones. "It's in the woods, watching us, waiting for us to get hungry enough." "What's in the woods, Jim? What happened to the others?" His eyes filled with tears. "We ate them," he whispered. "God forgive us, we ate them all." That's when I heard the sound, a low growling that seemed to come from everywhere at once, not like any animal I'd ever heard. It was the sound of an empty stomach, magnified 100 times. Jim heard it too. He let go of my arm and scrambled away on his hands and knees. "It's coming back," he sobbed. "It knows we're here." The temperature dropped even more. My breath came out in thick clouds now, and frost began forming on the nearby trees. In March, when it should have been getting warmer, that's when I saw it. Through the trees, maybe 50 yards away, something tall and thin was watching us. At first I thought it was just a dead tree, the kind that loses its bark and turns grey. But then it moved. It was icily 15 feet tall, maybe more. Skin like old leather, stretched tight over bones that stuck out at wrong angles. Its arms were too long, hanging down past where its knees should be, and its face. Its face was mostly mouth, a huge, gaping hole filled with teeth that looked like they'd been pulled from different animals and shoved in randomly. Some were flat like human molars, others were sharp like a wolf's fangs. All of them were stained dark with old blood. But the worst part was its eyes, black holes that seemed to pull at something inside me. Looking into them, I felt my stomach clench with a hunger I'd never experienced before. Not just for food, but for something deeper, something wrong. The thing tilted its head, studying us like a scientist studying bugs. When it opened its mouth, the voice that came out wasn't its own. "Michael," it said in Jim's voice. "Michael, I'm so hungry." Then it spoke in my wife's voice. "Mick, the children need food. They're starving, and..." Finally, in my own voice, "I have to feed them. I have to feed them something." Jim was right. I had to run. I grabbed Jim under his arms and hauled him to his feet. He weighed almost nothing, like his bones were hollow. "We have to go," I said. "Now." But Jim shook his head. "Can't run from it. Follows the hungry. We're all hungry now." He was right about one thing. I was getting hungry. Hungrier than I should be after eating breakfast just a few hours ago. My stomach was starting to cramp, and I could hear it growling. Despite the crackers I'd eaten on the drive up, the thing in the trees hadn't moved, but I could feel it watching us, waiting. I tried to lead Jim back toward the truck, but he collapsed after just a few steps. When I tried to give him more food from my pack, the same thing happened. It crumbled to nothing the moment he touched it. "Started 3 days ago," Jim whispered. "Food just ... goes bad, turns to dust, gets moldy in seconds. We thought it was the supplies, maybe they got wet or something. But then it kept happening. What about the others? Jim's face went pale. Bill was first. Found him eating tree bark behind the lodge. Said it was the only thing that didn't turn. Then he started looking at the rest of us different, like we were meat walking around. The cramping in my stomach was getting worse. I checked my watch. It had only been an hour since I'd found Jim, but I felt like I hadn't eaten in days. Tom tried to leave. Jim continued, took one of the trucks, said he was going for help. We found him crashed into that tree you saw. But when we got there, he shuddered. Parts of him were missing. Clean cuts, like someone had used a butcher knife. I felt something warm on my face and realized my nose was bleeding. Not a normal nosebleed. This was thick, dark blood that tasted like copper pennies. It's starting in you too, Jim said sadly. The hunger. First you get tired, then hungry, then the food stops working. Then you start looking at other people and thinking about how much meat they got on their bones. Through the trees, I could see the creature moving closer. It didn't walk like anything natural. Its two long legs bent in the wrong directions, and it seemed to glide rather than step. Dead leaves and small branches withered and blackened wherever it touched the ground. Tell me about the creature, I said, trying to stay focused despite the growing pain in my gut. When did you first see it? Second night. We were sitting around playing cards when all the food went bad at once. Canned beans turned to mush. Crackers became dust. Even the coffee grounds rotted in the pot. Then we heard something outside, like someone crying from hunger. Jim pointed toward where the creature lurked. Found tracks in the morning, human-shaped, but too big. And there were marks in the trees, like something had been scraping them with its claws, looking for sap to eat. But why eat each other? Why not just leave? Couldn't Jim's voice drop to a whisper? Every time we tried to go, we got turned around. Compass spun like crazy. GPS went dead. Roads we knew by heart suddenly led nowhere. Like the woods themselves were keeping us trapped. I understood now. This wasn't just some wild animal gone crazy. This was something that fed on human desperation. Something that created its own hunting ground. The creature was close enough now that I could see details I wished I couldn't. Its skin wasn't just gray. It was covered with old scars and what looked like bite marks, as if it had been eating itself for years. Its fingers ended in claws that were stained dark, and when it breathed, frost came out of its mouth, even though it was above freezing. The others, I said. What happened to them exactly? Jim closed his eyes. Bill was first. On the third day, he just snapped, grabbed a hunting knife, and went after Pete. Said he couldn't take the hunger anymore. We tried to stop him, but he was crazy as strong, like he wasn't human anymore. And then we ate Pete. Jim's voice was barely audible. Cooked him up in that pot you saw. And for a little while, the hunger went away, but it came back worse than before. So we did it again and again. My legs gave out, and I sat down hard on the muddy ground. The hunger was like a living thing inside me now, clawing at my insides. I'd brought emergency rations, but when I reached for them, they were already covered in green mold. How long do I have? I asked. Day. Maybe 2 if you're strong. Jim looked at me with eyes that held no hope. But you won't want to wait that long. The hunger, it makes you think crazy things. Makes you look at your own arms and wonder what they'd taste like. The creature stepped into the clearing. Up close, it was even more horrible. I could see that some of those teeth in its mouth were human. Molars and incisors mixed in with fangs and tusks. Its black eyes reflected nothing, like looking into deep water at night. When it spoke, it used the voice of my youngest daughter. Daddy, I'm hungry. Please feed me. I wanted to shoot it, but my service pistol felt like it weighed 100 pounds. I could barely lift my arms. That's what it does, Jim said. Uses voices you care about. Makes you want to give up. To feed it what it wants. What does it want? Us, but not just our bodies. It wants us to choose to be eaten. Wants us to give up our souls along with our meat. The thing that looked like hunger itself took another step closer. The ground under its feet turned black, and I could smell death rolling off it like smoke. Michael O'Brien, it said in my own voice. Father of 4. Provider. Protector. But what happens when you can't provide anymore? What happens when there's nothing left to give them? Images flashed in my mind. My kids sitting at the dinner table, plates empty, looking at me with big hungry eyes. My wife, getting thinner and thinner. All of them depending on me to keep them fed. I can end their suffering. the creature whispered, still using my voice. "I can make sure they never go hungry again. All you have to do is let me in." The pain in my stomach was unbearable now. I was so hungry I was starting to look at Jim and wonder how much meat was left on his bones. That's when I realized what this thing really was. Not just a monster, but a test. A choice between giving up and fighting on, even when fighting seemed impossible. I thought about my kids, about my wife, about all the families who came to these woods looking for peace and beauty. This thing had been feeding here for who knows how long, and it would keep feeding until someone stopped it. I reached into my shirt and pulled out the small silver cross I'd worn since I was a boy. My mother had put it around my neck the day I made my first communion, told me it would protect me when she couldn't. The creature saw the cross and hissed, a sound like steam escaping from a boiling pot. "That won't work," it snarled, and now its voice sounded like grinding bones. "Faith doesn't fill empty bellies. Prayer doesn't feed starving children." But something was happening. The cross was getting warm against my chest, and the terrible hunger was starting to fade just a little. "Jim," I said, "do you believe in anything? Anything at all?" He looked at me with confused eyes. "You used to go to church. Before all this, then pray with me. Whatever you remember." The creature let out a roar that shook the trees. It knew what we were doing, knew we were fighting back, but we were running out of time. The creature rushed at us, moving faster than anything that size should be able to move. But when it got within 10 feet of my cross, it stopped like it had hit an invisible wall. "Prayer won't save you," it growled, shifting back and forth just outside some kind of barrier. "I am hunger itself. I am the need that drives all living things. You cannot pray away starvation." But the cross was definitely working. The terrible cramping in my stomach had eased, and I could think clearly again. I helped Jim sit up straighter. "Our Father, who art in heaven," I began. Jim's voice joined mine, shaky but determined. "Hallowed be thy name." The creature screamed a sound like 100 people crying from hunger at once. It began pacing around us in a circle, looking for a way through whatever protection we'd created. "Give us this day our daily bread," we continued. "I am the daily bread," the thing roared. "I am what feeds when all else fails. I am what remains when civilized people show their true nature." It was changing as we watched, getting bigger, more horrible. Its arms stretched longer, its mouth opened wider. The scattered teeth fell out and were replaced by rows of sharp fangs like a shark's. "And forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us." There is no forgiveness. The creature's voice was becoming less human, more like the howling of wind through empty buildings. There is only hunger and the feeding, only the strong eating the weak. But something else was happening. With each word of the prayer, Jim was looking more human. Color was returning to his cheeks, and he was sitting up straighter. "And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil." The creature suddenly stopped moving, its black eyes fixed on something behind us. I turned around and saw them, the spirits of the men who had died here. They stood in a line between the trees, translucent but clearly visible. The other hunters from Jim's party, and others too. Men in old-fashioned clothes, native Americans, trappers, and loggers from decades past. All of them had died here. All of them had faced this same choice between humanity and hunger. "For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen." The creature let out one final roar and charged at us. But this time it passed right through us like we were made of smoke. It spun around, confused, clawing at the air where we sat. "You're losing power," I realized. "The more we resist, the weaker you get." It tried to speak, but its voice was fading. The borrowed human voices were gone, replaced by something that sounded like wind through bones. Jim stood up, and I was amazed to see he looked almost normal again. "It needs us to choose it," he said, understanding dawning in his eyes. "It can't just take us. We have to give ourselves to it." The creature was shrinking now, becoming less solid. The dead leaves and branches around it were turning green again, and I could hear birds singing in the distance. "All those people," I said, looking at the spirits still standing among the trees. "They didn't have to die. Some chose to fight it," Jim said. "But they were alone, one at a time. It's harder to resist when you're by yourself." The creature made one last attempt, shifting its shape to look like my wife. "Mick," it said in her voice, but the sound was hollow now, like an echo. "The children are hungry. They need you to come home. My children need me to come home alive." I said firmly. Not as some monster's puppet. The thing that had terrorized these woods for who knows how long let out a sound, like sighing, and began to fade away like morning mist, but just before it disappeared completely, it spoke one last time in its own voice, something ancient and cold and patient. I will wait, it whispered. I will always wait. When the food runs out, when the hunger comes, when people have to choose between death and feeding, I will be there. Then it was gone. The spirits among the trees began to fade too, but before they disappeared, one of them, an old Native American man, stepped forward and spoke directly to me. The Wendigo sleeps now, he said in a voice like rustling leaves, but it is not dead. It cannot die while hunger exists in the human heart. Watch for the signs, Ranger. Keep others away when the starving times come. Then they were all gone, and Jim and I were alone in a forest that suddenly felt normal again. Birds were singing, a squirrel chattered somewhere nearby, and the temperature was warming up to where it should be for March. We need to get out of here, I said, helping Jim to his feet. Can you walk? He nodded, looking around at the forest with new eyes. What do we tell people about what happened here? I thought about it as we made our way back toward the truck. Exposure, I said finally. We'll say the hunting party got caught in a late blizzard, ran out of food, and made some bad choices. People will understand that. And the creature, some stories are too dangerous to tell. We found my truck, where I'd left it, and the radio was working again. I called in the rescue, reported finding one survivor of a hunting party that had gotten stranded in bad weather. Jim backed up my story, and nobody asked too many questions. The official report blamed the deaths on exposure and poor emergency planning during an unexpected late-season storm. The remains we found at the lodge were listed as partially consumed by scavengers. People accepted it because it made sense, because it was something they could understand. But I kept the truth. Jim moved away after that, said he couldn't stand living so close to those woods anymore. Before he left, he gave me his phone number and made me promise to call if I ever heard about similar incidents. It's not gone, he said as we shook hands. Goodbye, it's just waiting. He was right. Over the next few years, I kept track of disappearances in the area. Every few winters, when the snow was especially deep and food was scarce, people would go missing in the remote areas, usually one or two at a time, but sometimes whole families. I started carrying different supplies in my truck. Along with the usual emergency gear, I packed religious items from different faiths, crosses, prayer books, blessed medals. I figured if people were going to get stranded up there, they might need weapons that bullets couldn't provide. The hardest part was the changes in myself. The hunger had touched me, and even though I'd fought it off, it left marks. I couldn't eat a meal without thinking about people who didn't have food. I started volunteering at soup kitchens, donating to food banks, keeping extra supplies for campers who looked unprepared. My wife noticed the changes but never asked about them directly. She just made sure there was always plenty of food in our house, and she never complained when I brought home strangers who looked hungry. The dreams were the worst part. On cold winter nights, I'd wake up hearing that voice, feeling that terrible hunger clawing at my insides. Sometimes I'd catch myself looking at my own arms and wondering what they'd taste like, just for a split second before my rational mind kicked in. But the cross my mother gave me always grew warm when those thoughts came, reminding me of who I chose to be. 5 years later, I got promoted to district supervisor. They wanted to move me to an office job, but I asked to stay in the field. Someone needed to keep an eye on the remote areas, especially during the bad winters. I trained other rangers about the dangers of the backcountry, but I never told them the whole truth. How could I? Who would believe that something made of pure hunger waited in the deep woods, patient as winter itself? Instead, I taught them about the signs, areas where compasses spun wildly, where food spoiled too quickly, where the temperature dropped for no reason. I called it environmental anomalies and told them to report anything unusual immediately. Most of them thought I was just being overcautious, but a few understood. The ones who'd grown up poor, who knew what real hunger felt like, they listened, with different ears. Last winter, we had another incident. A family got stranded at a remote cabin, and by the time we found them, the father was talking about the thing in the woods that makes the food go bad. I handled that one personally, made sure they got the help they needed. The father asked me if I believed him about the creature. I looked him in the eye and said, "Sometimes survival means making choices that change you forever." The important thing is what choices you make when the time comes. He understood. The Wendigo is still out there. I know, because sometimes, on the coldest nights, I can feel it watching, waiting for the next group of people to get desperate enough, hungry enough, to make the wrong choice. But I'm watching too. And as long as I'm here, as long as my faith holds, I'll make sure it keeps waiting. Because some hungers should never be fed. My name is James Hartwell, but everyone calls me Jimmy. 6 months ago, I thought I knew what fear was. I was wrong. I used to be a cop in Houston. 10 years walking those mean streets, dealing with drug dealers and gang fights. When my wife Sarah and I got married last year, she begged me to find something safer. I don't want to worry every night that you won't come home, she said. So when the Park Service offered me a ranger job in Louisiana, I jumped at it. Kissit National Forest seemed perfect. Miles of peaceful woods instead of concrete and crime. Clean air instead of car exhaust. The worst thing I'd have to deal with would be lost hikers or maybe some poachers. Boy, was I stupid. The forest sits deep in bayou country, where the water runs black and Spanish moss hangs like old funeral shrouds. Roads flood out when it rains hard, which happens a lot during hurricane season. The nearest cell tower is 50 miles away. When you're out there, you're really alone. I should have listened to the stories right from the start. On my first day, old Claude Boudreau came to the ranger station. He was a local Cajun who'd lived in these swamps his whole life. His weathered hands shook as he set a cup of coffee on my desk. "Ranger," he said in his thick accent, "you need to know about the loup-garou." I'd heard the word before. Cajun for werewolf, folklore stuff. Just old stories. "Mr. Boudreau," I said with a smile, "I don't believe in monsters." His dark eyes got serious. "You will." I laughed it off. I was a trained professional. I had a gun, a radio, and 6 years of police work behind me. What could possibly go wrong in a quiet forest? The first sign something was wrong came 3 weeks later. Claude called the station, his voice tight with fear. "Something's killing my cattle. Ranger, you need to come see." I drove out to his small farm on the edge of the forest. What I found there still gives me nightmares. 3 cows lay dead in the pasture. But they hadn't just been killed. They'd been torn apart with surgical precision. Their organs were arranged in neat piles, like someone had been performing an autopsy. The cuts were too clean for any normal predator. "What kind of animal does this?" I asked Claude. He pointed to the ground. In the soft mud were paw prints, big ones, bigger than any dog I'd ever seen. But here's the thing that made my skin crawl halfway across the field. The paw prints changed into human footprints. Not gradually, but suddenly, like whatever made them had just shifted form mid-stride. "That ain't no regular animal," Claude whispered. I took photos and measurements, trying to stay professional. There had to be a logical explanation. Maybe it was a pack of feral dogs working with poachers. Maybe someone was playing sick games to scare the locals. But deep down, something cold was already growing in my stomach. The next incident happened a week later. My dog, Rex, a German shepherd I'd trained myself, came with me on most patrols. He was fearless, had helped me catch armed suspects back in Houston, but when we approached the area where Claude's cattle died, Rex stopped dead. His ears flattened against his head. A low whine came from his throat, and he backed away, refusing to go further. I'd never seen him act like that. "Come on, boy," I said, tugging his leash. "It's just trees." But Rex wouldn't budge. He sat down and howled a long, mournful sound that echoed through the swamp. It was like he was mourning something that hadn't happened yet. That night, I was patrolling the back roads when my headlights caught something moving in the trees. It was tall, maybe 8 feet, walking on 2 legs like a man. But it moved wrong, too fluid, like it had too many joints. I stopped the truck and grabbed my flashlight. "Hello, this is the Park Service. Do you need help?" The thing stopped moving. Slowly, it turned toward me. In the beam of my flashlight, I saw eyes that glowed yellow like reflectors, not reflecting the light, actually glowing, like there was fire inside them. We stared at each other for maybe 10 seconds, then it dropped to all 4s and ran into the darkness faster than anything that size should move. I sat in my truck for 20 minutes, hands shaking as I wrote up the incident report. Large unidentified animal spotted on Sector 7 road, possibly escaped exotic pet or circus animal. But I knew it wasn't any kind of pet. 2 days later, they found Billy Bardo. Billy was a local trapper who knew these swamps better than anyone. He could track a mosquito through a hurricane, People said when his wife called to report him missing. I joined the search party. We found him 3 miles deep in the swamp, sitting by a dead cypress tree. He was alive, but something was terribly wrong. His clothes were shredded, hanging off him in strips. Scratches covered his arms and face, deep ones that should have needed stitches, but the worst part was his eyes. They were wild, darting around like he was seeing things that weren't there. When we tried to talk to him, he could only make growling sounds and whimpering noises, like he'd forgotten how to speak. "Billy," I said gently, "what happened? Who did this to you?" He looked right at me, and for a second, his eyes cleared. "They're coming for you next," he whispered. Then he threw back his head and howled like a wolf. We had to carry him out. The doctors said it was some kind of severe shock, but they couldn't explain the scratches or why he kept trying to bite the nurses. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about those glowing eyes and Billy's warning. Around midnight, I heard howling outside my cabin. Not one voice, but many, forming a chorus that seemed to go on forever. I looked out my window and saw shapes moving in the tree line. They stood on 2 legs, but their silhouettes were all wrong. Too tall, too angular. As I watched, one of them raised its head and howled again. The sound was intelligent, almost like it was trying to communicate something. Then they were gone, melting back into the darkness like they'd never been there. I checked the locks on my doors 3 times before I finally fell asleep. The attacks escalated quickly after that. Every few days, someone reported livestock killed in that same precise way. Always the same pattern, organs arranged like offerings. And those impossible tracks that changed from animal to human. I started carrying extra ammunition and sleeping with my gun under my pillow. Sarah noticed the change when she called. "You sound different, Jimmy," she said. "Tired? Are you okay?" "Just adjusting to the new job," I lied. How could I tell her that something was hunting people in my forest, something that shouldn't exist? The real terror started on a Tuesday night in August. I was doing a late patrol when I found the Rodriguez family's campsite. They were tourists from Texas, staying at one of the permitted camping areas. The tent was shredded like paper, sleeping bags torn open, their contents scattered. But no bodies, just blood, lots of it, and more of those shifting tracks leading deeper into the swamp. I followed the trail with my flashlight, Rex refusing to come with me. The tracks led to a clearing I'd never seen before, even though I'd mapped this area a dozen times. In the center stood an old oak tree, bigger than any tree I'd ever seen. Its trunk was carved with symbols that hurt to look at. Hanging from the branches were pieces of clothing, fresh pieces, a child's t-shirt, a woman's jacket, a man's boots, still laced. As I stood there, frozen with horror, I heard breathing that wasn't my own. Slow, deliberate breathing, coming from all around me. The shadows between the trees seemed to move and shift. Then I saw them. They stood at the edge of the clearing, maybe a dozen of them. In the moonlight, they looked like a cross between wolves and men. They had the basic shape of people, 2 arms, 2 legs, standing upright, but their proportions were wrong. Too tall, too muscular. Their faces stretched into snouts full of teeth that gleamed white in the darkness. The largest one, standing directly across from me, opened its mouth and spoke in perfect English. "Hello, Ranger Hartwell." My blood turned to ice. It knew my name. "We've been watching you," it continued, its voice a low growl that somehow formed words. "You're strong, capable. We could use someone like you." I fumbled for my gun, but my hands wouldn't work right. The creature's yellow eyes held me frozen. "The family you're looking for is safe," it said. "For now. They're our guests while we decide what to do with them. But you're special. You could join us willingly." "What are you?" I managed to whisper. It smiled, showing rows of razor-sharp teeth. "We are what we've always been, hunters, guardians of the old ways. This forest has been ours for generations." The others began to circle me slowly, their claws clicking on the ground. I could smell them now, a mix of wet dog and something darker, like old blood. "Every pack needs new members," the leader continued. "We've chosen you. Your strength, your training, it would serve us well. All you have to do is accept our gift. And if I refuse," its smile widened, "then you'll join us anyway. But it will be much more painful." That's when my training kicked in. I drew my gun and fired 3 shots center mass. The bullets hit the leader square in the chest, knocking it backward. But within seconds, it was standing again, the wounds already closing. "Silver would work better," it said. sounding almost amused. I ran. I crashed through the underbrush, branches tearing at my clothes, thorns cutting my face. Behind me, I could hear them giving chase, not just the sound of running, but the sound of hunting. They howled and yipped to each other, coordinating their pursuit like a military unit. My truck was parked half a mile away. I'd never make it running in a straight line, so I tried to use the terrain to my advantage, splashing through shallow streams and climbing over fallen logs. But they knew this forest better than I ever would. I could hear them getting closer, their breathing becoming louder. Just as I thought they'd catch me, I broke through the tree line and saw my truck. I dove into the cab and gunned the engine, not bothering with my seatbelt. In the rearview mirror, I saw them emerge from the forest. They didn't chase the truck, they just stood there, watching me go with those terrible glowing eyes. The leader raised one clawed hand in what might have been a wave goodbye. I drove straight to the nearest town and called for backup. State police, FBI, National Guard. I didn't care who came, as long as they had silver bullets, and lots of them. But my radio was dead. My cell phone had no signal. It was like the whole world had been cut off. I tried to drive out of the forest, but every road I took led me back to the same spot. After 3 hours of driving in circles, I realized the truth. They weren't letting me leave. With no other choice, I went back to my cabin. I boarded up the windows and doors, then searched through my emergency supplies for anything that might help. I found a small silver cross that Sarah had given me and some blessed salt from my grandmother's funeral. It wasn't much, but it was all I had. Night fell like a curtain. The howling started immediately, but this time it was different, closer, more organized. They were surrounding the cabin, testing my defenses. Something heavy landed on the roof. Claws scraped against the metal, trying to find a way in. I heard wood splintering as they tested the boarded windows. "Come out, Ranger," the leader's voice called from outside. "Make this easy on yourself." A hurricane was building offshore. I could hear the wind picking up, rain starting to patter against the walls. Maybe the storm would drive them away. Maybe it would wash away whatever curse held this place. Or maybe it would just make things worse. The attack came at midnight. They hit the cabin from all sides at once. Claws tore through the wooden boards like paper. Yellow eyes gleamed in the gaps they created. I fired shot after shot, but regular bullets barely slowed them down. One of them burst through the back door, its massive frame filling the doorway. I emptied my clip into its chest, and it stumbled, but kept coming. Its claws raked across my arm, leaving deep gouges that burned like fire. That's when I learned something terrible. Their claws carried infection. Whatever they were, it was contagious. I could feel something changing in my blood, like poison spreading through my veins. More of them poured through the windows. I retreated to the bathroom, the smallest room in the cabin, and barricaded the door. Outside, they howled in frustration, clawing at the walls. "You can't hide forever." The leader called. "The change has already begun. You can feel it, can't you? The hunger, the need to hunt." He was right. My vision was getting sharper, my hearing more acute. I could smell things I'd never noticed before, the individual sense of each creature outside, the fierce sweat on my own skin, the blood from my wounds. But something else was happening too. The hurricane was getting stronger, and water was starting to seep under the cabin door. The storm was flooding the forest, just like it did every few years. That's when I remembered something Claude had told me. These creatures were tied to the land itself. They were strongest on solid ground, weakest in running water. I waited until the water was ankle deep, then kicked open the bathroom door. The creatures were still there, but they seemed sluggish, uncertain. The flooding was affecting them. I ran for the front door, splashing through the rising water. Behind me, they gave chase, but they were slower now, more clumsy. Whatever supernatural power they had was being washed away by the flood. I made it to the old radio tower at the edge of the forest and started climbing. The metal was slippery with rain, but I hauled myself up rung by rung. Below me, the pack gathered at the base of the tower, howling in frustration. "You can run, Ranger," the leader called up through the storm, "but you can't escape what you're becoming." I climbed until I reached the top, then held on tight as the hurricane winds tried to tear me loose. The creatures below paced back and forth, but they couldn't climb the metal tower. Something about it burned them. I spent the longest night of my life clinging to that tower while the storm raged around me and demons howled below. Dawn came eventually, gray and exhausted. The floodwaters receded, and the creatures were gone. I climbed down on shaking legs, and walked back to my cabin, or what was left of it. The official report blamed everything on an unusually aggressive pack of feral dogs, driven to attack by the approaching hurricane. The Rodriguez family was found alive but traumatized, claiming they'd been held captive by large animals but unable to remember details. Billy Thibodeau recovered his ability to speak, but he never went back into the swamps. He moved to Baton Rouge and became a born-again Christian. I requested a transfer immediately. The Park Service was happy to relocate me after the dog attack incident. Sarah was worried about the scars on my arm, but I told her they were from the storm damage. I never told her about the other changes. My hearing is too sharp now. I can track people by scent alone. On clear nights, when the moon is full, I have dreams about running through forests on 4 legs, hunting things that scream and bleed. The infection is still in me, dormant but waiting. I can feel it sometimes, especially when I'm angry or scared. Part of me wants to give in, to stop fighting what I'm becoming, but I won't. I can't. I've dedicated my life to watching for signs of them now. I monitor police reports from across the South, looking for patterns of animal attacks that follow their methods, because they're still out there, and they're still recruiting. The pack that hunted me has existed for generations, adding new members whenever they need them. They're patient, they're intelligent, and they never give up on a target. 6 months ago, Sarah started having strange dreams. She talks in her sleep sometimes, making sounds that aren't quite human. Last week, I found scratches on our back door that I know I didn't make. They found me again. If you're reading this, and you work in law enforcement or park service in the South, listen carefully. If you get reports of livestock killed with surgical precision, if you find tracks that change from animal to human, if local people start talking about loup-garou or werewolves, don't ignore it. Get silver bullets, get blessed salt, get out of there as fast as you can, because some packs don't hunt for food, they hunt for family, and once they choose you, they never let go. My name is David Crowfeather, and I need to tell you what happened to me in the fall of 1987. Most people won't believe this story. Hell, I wouldn't believe it either if someone else told it to me. But I lived through it, and the marks it left on me are still there if you know where to look. I was 31 then, working as a park ranger at Canyon de Chelly National Monument in Arizona. Been doing that job for 9 years, ever since I got out of college with my anthropology degree. The pay wasn't much, but I loved the work. Canyon de Chelly sits right in the heart of Navajo country, my mother's people, and part of my job was helping preserve the old ruins and working with tribal families who still lived in the canyon. Being half Irish on my dad's side made things complicated sometimes. Some of the traditional folks didn't trust me completely. They'd talk in Navajo when I walked up, then switch to English like they were doing me a favor. I understood more than they thought I did, but I never let on. My grandmother had taught me the old language before she died, along with stories I was starting to wish I'd paid more attention to. October in Arizona is beautiful. The cottonwoods turn golden, and the air gets crisp enough that you need a jacket in the mornings. Tourists come from all over to see the ancient cliff dwellings built by the Anasazi, the old ones who vanished long before the Navajo arrived. During the day, I'd guide tour groups through the ruins, explaining how people lived there 1,000 years ago. At night, I'd patrol the backcountry where few visitors ever went. That's where the trouble started. The canyon is huge, over 80,000 acres of red rock walls, hidden caves, and sacred sites. Some places the Navajo won't even talk about, let alone visit. They have reasons going back generations, stories about things that happened in the old days. I always figured these were just superstitions, ways to keep people from messing with dangerous cliff faces or getting lost in the maze of side canyons. I was wrong about that. The first sign something was off came from the Yazzie family. They lived in a traditional hogan about 5 miles up Canyon del Muerto, one of the main branches. Old man Yazzie came to the visitor center on a Tuesday morning, hat in his hands, looking like he hadn't slept in days. "Something's wrong at our place," he told me in English, though he spoke Navajo just fine. "My mother, ... she's walking around again." I knew his mother. She'd died 3 months earlier, and I'd helped arrange for her burial in the family plot near their hogan. She was 92, a tiny woman who made the best fry bread I'd ever tasted. "What do you mean, walking around?" I asked. Yazzie's hands shook a little. At night, Mary saw her first. standing by the sheep pen. Then Joe saw her by the well. She looks wrong. Her face doesn't move right when she talks. My training kicked in. Sometimes grief makes people see things. Mr. Ya, losing someone is hard. Sometimes our minds, you think I'm crazy. He stood up, angry now. Fine, but you should check the burial site. Something's been digging there. That got my attention. Grave robbing was a federal crime, and it happened more than people liked to admit. Artifacts from Native American sites could bring good money from collectors who didn't ask questions. I'll drive out there this afternoon, I promised. The burial site was a 20-minute drive from the visitor center, then a short hike up a rocky trail. The Yazzie family plot sat on a small mesa overlooking the canyon, marked with traditional grave houses, small wooden structures built over each burial. His mother's grave house had been torn apart. The wooden boards lay scattered around a hole in the red earth. Someone had dug down about 4 feet, deep enough to reach the body. But whoever did it had been sloppy, leaving tools behind and trash scattered around the site. I took photos and made notes, trying to stay professional even though the sight made my stomach turn. That's when I noticed the footprints. They started human boot prints in the soft dirt around the grave. But as I followed them away from the site, they changed. The heel marks got smaller, the toe prints stretched out. 20 feet from the grave, they looked more like animal tracks. 50 feet out, they were definitely not human. But here's the thing that made my skin crawl. 100 yards from the grave, they turned human again. Same boot size, same wear pattern on the sole. Like someone had walked away on 2 legs, dropped to all 4s for a while, then stood back, up and kept walking. I followed the trail as far as I could, but it disappeared on a rocky slope where tracks wouldn't show. By then, the sun was getting low, and Canyon de Chelly at night is no place to be wandering around alone. I hiked back to my truck, my mind racing. In 9 years of ranger work, I'd seen plenty of weird stuff. Tourists got lost and told crazy stories about voices in the rocks. Hikers claimed they saw people in old-fashioned clothes near the ruins. Once, a photographer swore he caught a picture of an Anasazi warrior. But when we developed the film, it was just shadows on the canyon wall. This felt different. The grave robbing was real. I had photos and evidence, but those footprints didn't make sense. Animals don't wear boots, and people don't suddenly grow claws. Driving back to headquarters, I tried to remember what my grandmother used to say about the old stories. She'd died when I was 16, but I could still hear her voice sometimes, speaking Navajo in the same rhythm she used for prayers and warnings. Some things she used to tell me are better left alone. The old ones knew which places to avoid, which names not to speak. You young people think you're so smart with your books and your schools, but there are older kinds of knowledge, and older kinds of danger. I'd always figured she was just trying to scare me into staying out of trouble. Now, staring at those impossible footprints in my photographs, I wondered if maybe she'd been trying to prepare me for something else entirely. That night, I called the tribal police and reported the grave robbing. They promised to send someone out in the morning. I also called my supervisor in Flagstaff and filed an incident report. Everything by the book, everything normal and professional. But lying in bed that night, listening to coyotes howling in the distance, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. Every time I started to drift off, I'd hear a sound outside my trailer, footsteps, maybe, or something scratching at the metal siding. When I finally got up to look, there was nothing there, just darkness and the smell of sage on the night wind. The next morning, I found muddy footprints on my porch. Human footprints, size 11 boots, same as mine. But I hadn't been outside since sunset, and I always cleaned my boots before coming indoors. Someone wearing my exact boots had walked around my trailer in the middle of the night. That's when I started to understand that this wasn't just about grave robbing anymore. The tribal police officer who came out to investigate the gravesite was a guy named Jimmy Beggy. I'd worked with him before on other cases, missing hikers, mostly, and the occasional drunk tourist who thought climbing ancient ruins was a good idea. Jimmy took one look at the destroyed gravehouse and whistled low. Whoever did this was in a hurry, he said, kneeling by the hole. Look at these shovel marks, they just hacked their way down. No care at all. What about the footprints? I asked, showing him my photos. He studied them for a long time, his face getting more serious. Jimmy was traditional, grew up speaking Navajo, learned the old ways from his grandfather. When it got quiet like this, it usually meant something was bothering him more than he wanted to say. These could be anything, he finally said. Ground's soft here. Prints can get distorted by wind, rain, animal traffic. But he wouldn't meet my eyes when he said it. We spent the morning collecting evidence and taking measurements. The hole was empty. Whoever robbed the grave had taken the body. That was unusual. Most grave robbers were after pottery, jewelry, anything they could sell. Bodies were just obstacles to be moved aside. Why would someone steal an old woman's remains? I asked. Jimmy packed up his camera equipment without answering. When we were walking back to our vehicles, he finally spoke up. David, you know your grandmother's stories, right? The old ones she used to tell. Some of them, why? Maybe you should talk to your family. Ask them about what kind of people might have used for the dead. The way he said it made my chest tight. Jimmy, what aren't you telling me? Nothing I can prove. He got in his patrol car, then rolled down the window. Just ... Be careful out here. Maybe don't patrol alone for a while. He drove away, leaving me standing in the dust with more questions than answers. That afternoon, I tried calling my Uncle Robert on the reservation. He was my mum's older brother, a medicine man who knew more about the old ways than anyone else in our family. But his phone just rang and rang. I spent the rest of the day doing normal ranger work, checking campsites, talking to tourists, writing reports, everything routine, everything normal. But I kept thinking about Jimmy's words, and about the footprints that changed from human to animal and back again. Around sunset, I was locking up the visitor center when a tourist approached me. Middle-aged guy, expensive camera around his neck, wearing the kind of hiking clothes you buy at outdoor stores in Phoenix. "Excuse me, Ranger," he said. "I was wondering if you could help me. I seem to have lost something." "What kind of something?" He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. My face. For a second, I thought I'd misheard him. "I'm sorry." "What?" "My face," he repeated, still smiling that empty smile. "I put it down somewhere, and now I can't find it. Do you know where I might have left it?" The hair on my arms stood up. Something was very wrong with this guy. His voice sounded normal, but his facial expressions were all off, like someone who'd learned how to smile from watching TV, but had never actually felt happy. "Sir, are you feeling all right? Do you need medical attention?" "Oh, I'm fine," he said. "Better than fine, actually. I was hoping you might know where I could find another face. A better one, maybe. Yours looks very nice." I backed toward the visitor center door, hand moving to the radio on my belt. "Sir, I think you should sit down. Let me call someone to help you." But when I looked up from my radio, he was gone. Just vanished, like he'd never been there at all. I searched the parking lot, checked behind the building, even looked inside the restrooms. Nothing. The only thing left was a smell in the air, something like old leather and wet dog. That night, I called my supervisor and reported the incident. "Probably someone on drugs," I told him, "or having some kind of medical episode." But I didn't believe that. The tourist's eyes had been too aware, too focused. Whatever was wrong with him, it wasn't drugs or illness. I drove home to my trailer, double-checked all the locks, and tried to convince myself I was overreacting. Weird things happened in remote places. People got lost, dehydrated, confused. Maybe the grave robbing and the strange tourist were completely unrelated. Around midnight, I woke up to the sound of scratching. It was coming from the roof of my trailer, directly above my bed. Slow, deliberate scratching, like someone drawing patterns in the metal with their fingernails. I lay there listening, trying to figure out what could make that sound. Tree branches, maybe blown by wind, except there were no trees near my trailer, and the night was perfectly still. The scratching stopped. Then I heard footsteps. Someone was walking around on my roof. Slow, careful steps from one end of the trailer to the other, back and forth, like they were pacing. I grabbed my flashlight and service pistol and went outside. The yard around my trailer was empty. I shined the light up at the roof. Nothing there either. But in the beam of my flashlight, I could see something that made my blood turn cold. Footprints in the dust on my roof. Human footprints. Bare feet this time, with toes that were too long and nails that had left scratch marks in the metal. I called out, "Hey, this is federal property. Show yourself." Nothing answered except the wind through the sagebrush. But as I stood there in my yard, flashlight beams sweeping across the desert, I got the strongest feeling that something was watching me. not just looking, studying me, learning me, like a predator figuring out the best way to take down its prey. I went back inside and spent the rest of the night sitting in my kitchen with the lights on and my gun on the table. Every sound made me jump. Every shadow seemed to move. When morning came, I found something that nearly made me quit my job on the spot. There was a piece of skin hanging from the antenna of my truck. Human skin, pale and thin, like it had been peeled off in one piece. It flapped in the morning breeze like a flag. I called Jimmy Beggy immediately. "You need to get out here," I told him. "Something's happening, and it's getting worse." "What kind of something?" I looked at that piece of skin fluttering from my antenna and tried to find words that wouldn't make me sound crazy. "The kind your grandfather used to warn you about," I said. There was a long silence on the other end of the phone. Then Jimmy said, "I'll be there in an hour. Don't touch anything, and don't go anywhere alone." While I waited for him, I sat in my trailer and tried to remember everything my grandmother had ever told me about the old stories. Most of it was fragments, warnings about places to avoid, names that shouldn't be spoken, things that hunted in the darkness between worlds. But one story kept coming back to me, something she'd told me when I was maybe 12, after I'd asked her why some of the old-timers got so upset when coyotes howled near the village. "There are things that wear skins that don't belong to them," she'd said. "Things that steal faces and voices and memories. They walk on two legs like people, but they are not people. They are something else, something hungry. And once they notice you, they never stop watching." "What do they want?" I'd asked. "To be you," she'd said. "To take your place, your life, your very self. And they're very, very good at it." Sitting in my trailer that morning, watching a piece of human skin blow in the wind, I finally understood what she'd been trying to tell me. Something was wearing skins that didn't belong to it. Something was learning to be human by studying people like me. And now it knew where I lived. Jimmy Beggy took one look at the skin hanging from my antenna and immediately got on his radio to call for backup. While we waited, he walked circles around my trailer, studying the ground like he was reading a book written in dirt and footprints. "This is bad, David," he said. "Really bad. What exactly are we dealing with here?" He glanced around to make sure we were alone, then lowered his voice. "My grandfather called them Ye Naldalushi, skinwalkers, people who broke the most sacred laws and became something else, something wrong." I'd heard the term before, whispered in conversations that stopped when outsiders came near. Even half Navajo like me wasn't supposed to know these stories. I thought those were just legends. So did I. Jimmy pointed to tracks in the dust around my trailer. "But legends don't leave footprints that change from human to wolf, to bear and back to human again." The backup he'd called for was his sergeant, a guy named Tom Begay, Jimmy's older brother, as it turned out. Tom took one look at the evidence and immediately radioed for more officers. Within an hour, we had 5 tribal police vehicles parked around my trailer. "We need to evacuate the area," Tom said. "Close off this whole section of the monument until we figure out what we're dealing with." But I shook my head. "This thing is hunting people. If we just run away, it'll find other victims. The Yazzie family, tourists, other rangers. We have to stop it." "Stop it with what?" Jimmy asked. "Bullets don't work on Ye Naldalushi, neither do handcuffs or jail cells." "Then what does work?" The brothers exchanged looks. Tom finally spoke up. "Traditional methods, sacred things. But that means involving the medicine people, and they don't like to get mixed up in law enforcement business." "What about my uncle, Robert?" I asked. "He's a medicine man." "Robert, Red Horse. He's your uncle." Tom looked surprised. "Yeah, he might help. If we can find him." That's when I remembered something that made my stomach drop. I tried calling him yesterday. No answer. What if this thing already got to him? We drove out to Uncle Robert's place immediately. All 5 police vehicles in a convoy, like we were preparing for war. His house sat by itself at the end of a dirt road. Traditional hogan next to a modern trailer, with a corral for his horses and a few outbuildings scattered around the property. The place was too quiet. No horses in the corral, no smoke from the chimney, no sign of life anywhere. We found Uncle Robert's body in his trailer. He was sitting at his kitchen table, slumped forward like he'd fallen asleep while eating breakfast. But when Tom carefully lifted his head, we saw that his face was gone. Not cut off or torn away, gone, like someone had peeled it off in one perfect piece. "Jesus Christ," one of the younger officers whispered. "Don't," Tom snapped. "Don't." Take the Lord's name. Not here. Not now. This is something older and hungrier than anything in your Bible. Jimmy was studying the scene with the focused attention of a hunter. Look at his hands, he said. No defensive wounds. He didn't fight back. Why not? I asked. Because he knew what was coming. Traditional people, they know there's no point fighting a Yi Naldlushi with physical force. It's like trying to punch a nightmare. We searched the rest of the property but found no other clues. Whatever had killed Uncle Robert was long gone, probably wearing his face by now, walking around in his skin. As we were preparing to leave, I noticed something strange about the horses. Uncle Robert owned 4 of them, but we'd only found 3 bodies in the corral, killed by something with claws and teeth. The 4th horse, a big painted mare named Sasha, was missing. Where's the other horse? I asked Jimmy. He studied the corral, counting the bodies. Don't know, maybe it got away. But as we drove back toward town, I saw something that made me tell Tom to stop the convoy. There, about half a mile from Uncle Robert's place, the painted mare was standing by the side of the road. Just standing there, completely still, watching our vehicles approach. That's weird, Jimmy said. Sasha's usually skittish around strangers. Tom rolled down his window and whistled, the way you'd call a friendly horse. Sasha started walking toward us, and that's when I noticed something that made my skin crawl. The horse was walking on its hind legs, not rearing up or dancing, walking upright like a person, front hoofs dangling at its sides like arms. Its head was tilted at an unnatural angle, and its eyes reflected the afternoon sunlight like mirrors. Drive, I said quietly. Drive now. Tom hit the gas, and all 5 vehicles sped away from that impossible sight. In the rearview mirror, I watched the horse thing until it disappeared around a bend in the road. That night, the tribal police set up a command post at the visitor center. They brought in extra officers, floodlights, communication equipment. The plan was to patrol in pairs, stay in radio contact, and try to track down whatever was wearing Uncle Robert's face. Around 10 p.m., we got our first report. A family camping at Spider Rock had called 911, screaming that someone was trying to break into their RV. The dispatcher could hear scratching sounds and inhuman howling in the background before the line went dead. 2 officers were dispatched to check on them. They found the RV empty, with the door torn off its hinges and claw marks scraped deep into the aluminum siding. No sign of the family anywhere, but they did find something else. A video camera, still running, knocked to the ground during whatever had happened. When we played back the footage, we saw the camping family, Mom, Dad, 2 teenage kids, sitting around their campfire, roasting marshmallows and telling jokes. Normal family vacation stuff. Then, at the edge of the camera's view, something stepped out of the darkness. It looked like Uncle Robert. Same height, same build, same clothes he'd been wearing when we found his body. But something was wrong. With the way it moved a fluid, like it had extra joints in all the wrong places. The thing that looked like Uncle Robert walked straight toward the family's campfire. The father stood up, probably thinking it was just another camper looking for help. Evening, the Robert thing said, and its voice was perfect, exactly like my uncle's deep, calm tone. Mind if I warm myself by your fire? Sure thing, the father replied. Beautiful night, isn't it? Yes, the creature said. Perfect for hunting. That's when the camera went crazy. The image shook and spun as whoever was filming dropped it and ran. We could hear screaming, the sound of tearing metal, and underneath it all, something that might have been laughter. When the camera finally stopped moving, it was pointed at the night sky, but we could still hear sounds, wet, tearing sounds, and voices, multiple voices, all talking at once, having conversations that didn't make sense. Please don't, a woman's voice pleaded. I'll be good to your family. Uncle Robert's voice answered. I'll take such good care of them. Where are my kids? A man asked. Right here, said a teenage boy. We're right here, Dad. But the boy's voice was coming from the same place as Uncle Robert's voice. The same throat, the same mouth. The recording ended there. It's collecting them, Jimmy said quietly. Voices, faces, entire identities, learning to be them. Tom was already on the radio, calling for more backup. We need to evacuate the entire monument. Get everyone out. Shut down all access roads. But I was thinking about something else. The camping family had been at Spider Rock, one of the most sacred sites in Canyon de Chelly, a place where the old spirits were supposed to be strongest. Why there? I asked. Of all the places it could hunt, Why choose Spider Rock? Jimmy looked at me with something like respect. You're thinking like a traditional person now. Location matters. Spiritual energy, ley lines, places where the barrier between worlds is thin. So it's not just hunting randomly. It's building power, gathering strength from sacred places, and using that power to become more than just a simple Tom added grimly. This thing is evolving. That's when the lights went out. The visitor center's generator died with a mechanical cough, plunging us into complete darkness. Our flashlights clicked on immediately, but the beams seemed weak and yellowish, like they were fighting against something thicker than ordinary dark. From somewhere outside came the sound of voices, lots of voices, all talking at once. The camping, family, Uncle Robert, people I didn't recognize, all having different conversations that overlapped and contradicted each other. "Hello, David," my grandmother's voice called from the darkness. "I've been waiting for you." My blood turned to ice. My grandmother had been dead for 15 years. "Don't listen," Jimmy whispered. "Whatever it says, don't believe it." But the voice was perfect, exactly like I remembered, down to the way she pronounced my name with a slight accent. "You never listened to my stories," grandmother's voice continued. "Now look what's happened. People are dead because you didn't pay attention." "It's not her," I told myself. "It's not her." "Oh, but I am," the voice said. And now it was coming from right outside the window. "I am everyone who ever died in this canyon. Everyone who ever walked these paths. Everyone who ever had their face stolen and their voice borrowed." The window glass began to crack. "We need to move," Tom said. "Now." We grabbed our equipment and headed for the back door. But before we could reach it, something started scratching at the metal from outside. Long, deliberate scratches, like claws drawing patterns in the steel. "Front door," Jimmy said. But as we turned toward the front of the building, we heard my grandmother's voice again, except now it was coming from inside the visitor center with us. "David," she whispered, right behind my ear, "turn around and look at me." I spun around, flashlight beam cutting through the darkness, and saw something that will haunt me for the rest of my life. It was wearing my grandmother's face, but the proportions were all wrong. The face was stretched over something larger, like a mask pulled too tight. The eyes were in the right place, but they reflected light like an animal's. The mouth moved when it spoke, but there were too many teeth behind the lips. "Aren't you going to hug your grandmother?" it asked in her voice. That's when I ran. We burst out of the visitor center into the night, and immediately I knew we were in serious trouble. The thing wearing my grandmother's face followed us, but it wasn't alone anymore. Shadows moved all around the parking lot, shapes that looked human from a distance but wrong up close. "The vehicles," Tom shouted. We ran for the police cars, but when we reached them, we found all the tires slashed and the engines torn apart. Pieces of metal and rubber were scattered across the asphalt, like someone had taken the cars apart with their bare hands. "Radio for help," Jimmy said. But when he tried his handheld, all we got was static. Then, through the white noise, voices started talking. The camping family, Uncle Robert, my grandmother, all of them speaking at once, creating a chorus of stolen voices that made my head spin. "No one's coming to help you," said a voice I recognized as my own. I was hearing myself talk, but I wasn't speaking. "This is between us now, David Crowfeather." The thing wearing my voice stepped out of the shadows, and I was looking at myself. Same height, same face, same ranger uniform. The only difference was the eyes. They were completely black, like someone had filled them with oil. "You know what I am now," my double said. "Your grandmother's stories finally make sense, don't they?" "You're a skinwalker," I said. "Yay," knowled Lucy. "I'm so much more than that." The thing that looked like me smiled with my face. "I'm everyone who ever died in this canyon. Every face that was ever stolen. Every voice that was ever borrowed. I'm a collector, David, and you're going to help me expand my collection." That's when I understood what it really wanted. This wasn't just about hunting random victims. It was building something, a library of human experiences, a database of stolen lives, and it needed someone who knew the canyon intimately, someone with authority and access. It needed a park ranger. "The sacred sites," I said. "You're not just killing people there, you're absorbing the spiritual energy, using it to become stronger." "Very good." My doppelganger clapped with my hands. "The old places have power, and power can be harvested. Every ritual site, every burial ground, Every spot where the ancestors touched the spirit world, they're all batteries waiting to be drained. Jimmy stepped protectively in front of me. Traditional protections still work. Sage, turquoise, the old prayers, duvet. The David thing laughed with my voice. Your Uncle Robert knew all the old protections. How well did they work for him? From the darkness around us, more figures emerged. Uncle Robert, the camping family, other people I didn't recognize, all of them moving with that same fluid, wrong motion. They're all me now, the David thing said. Every face I've taken, every voice I've stolen. I can be anyone I want, speak with any authority, go anywhere I choose. And once I have your ranger credentials, David, I'll have access to every sacred site in the southwest. Tom raised his service pistol and fired 3 shots center mass at my doppelganger. The bullets passed right through it like it was made of smoke. Physical force won't work, Jimmy said. We need traditional weapons, sacred objects. Where are we supposed to get those? I asked. Your grandmother, Jimmy said. She was a medicine woman, wasn't she? Traditional people always keep sacred things for protection. My grandmother, the real one, not the stolen face this creature was wearing. She'd been dead for 15 years, but I still had her. Trailer still kept some of her belongings, including a small leather pouch she'd always worn around her neck, filled with things she'd never let anyone else touch. Her medicine bundle, I said. It's in my trailer. Then that's where we're going, Tom said. We started moving through the darkness, using our flashlights to navigate between the buildings. The stolen face things followed us, staying just at the edge of our light, pacing us like wolves following wounded prey. My trailer was only half a mile from the visitor center, but it felt like the longest walk of my life. Every shadow could be hiding another stolen face. Every sound could be the creature preparing to attack. Tell me about the bundle, Jimmy said as we walked. What's in it? I don't know exactly. She never let me look. But I remember her burning sage from it during prayers. And there was something made of turquoise. A small animal, I think. Good. Sage for purification, turquoise for protection. If she was a real medicine woman, there might be other things too. Corn, pollen, sacred stones, maybe even a piece of meteorite. We reached my trailer without being attacked, but I could feel the creatures watching us from the darkness. The David thing was talking to them in my voice, giving instructions I couldn't quite hear. Inside the trailer, I went straight to my grandmother's trunk, the one place I'd never disturbed since her death. The medicine bundle was right on top, wrapped in red cloth and tied with sinew. Grandmother, I whispered in Navajo, using words I hadn't spoken in years. If you can hear me, I need your help. I unwrapped the bundle, and immediately the air in the trailer changed. It felt cleaner somehow, like after a thunderstorm. Inside were the things Jimmy had predicted: sage, turquoise, corn, pollen, plus some items I didn't recognize. Stones carved with symbols, small bones tied with colored thread, and a piece of what looked like black glass. Obsidian, Jimmy said, identifying the glass. Sacred to many tribes. Very powerful for cutting spiritual ties. How do we use this stuff? Carefully, Tom said from his position by the window. And quickly, they're surrounding the trailer. Through the windows, I could see them. Dozens of stolen faces, all staring at us with eyes that reflected our flashlight beams. The David thing stood at the front of the group, still wearing my face, still smiling with my mouth. Come out, David had called. Let's finish this conversation. What do we do? I asked Jimmy. We make a stand. Use the sacred objects to create a protection circle. Then force the creature to face you one-on-one. If we can separate it from all the stolen faces, make it show its true form, the obsidian might be able to cut its connection to this world. And if that doesn't work, Jimmy looked at the creatures surrounding us. Then we die, and it adds our faces to its collection. We arranged the sacred objects in a circle on my living room floor, following Jimmy's instructions. The sage went in the 4 directions, the turquoise stones at the cardinal points, the corn pollen sprinkled in patterns my grandmother had taught me when I was young. When we lit the sage, the smoke didn't rise straight up like normal. Instead, it spread outward in a perfect circle, creating a barrier between us and the windows. The effect on the creatures outside was immediate. They began backing away from the trailer, making sounds like animals in pain. It's working, Tom said. But the David thing just laughed. Clever, but I don't need to come inside to get what I want. The scratching started again, on the roof, on the walls, all around us. But this time it wasn't random. The creatures were carving something, cutting symbols into the metal of my trailer. They're making their own ritual circle, Jimmy realized, turning your protections against you. The sage smoke began to thin, and I could feel something pressing against the sacred barriers we'd created. We're running out of time, I said. That's when I noticed something about the obsidian knife in my grandmother's bundle. It wasn't just black glass, there were patterns etched into the blade, symbols that seemed to move in the firelight. Jimmy, look at this. He examined the blade carefully. These are very old symbols, older than Navajo, older than Anasazi. This might be from the first people, the ones who knew how to fight things like this. How do I use it? Cut the connection, not the body that's just stolen skin. Cut the spiritual cord that ties it to this world. But David... He looked at me seriously. To do that, you'll have to get close enough to touch it. And once you're outside this circle, the protections won't help you. Through the window, I could see my doppel. My name is Carlos Mendoza, but everyone calls me Charlie. I've been a ranger at Big Bend National Park for 7 years now, and I thought I'd seen everything the desert could throw at me. Rattlesnakes, flash floods, drug runners crossing from Mexico, tourists who think they can hike 20 miles in August heat with one water bottle. But I was wrong, dead wrong. It was September 1969, and the desert felt different that month. Even the old-timers who'd lived on the border their whole lives were talking about it. The air tasted metallic, like pennies on your tongue. Animals were acting strange, coyotes howling in the middle of the day, cattle bunching up tight instead of spreading out to graze. My grandmother would have said the spirits were restless. Being half Mexican and raised on both sides of the Rio Grande, I knew enough to listen when the desert tried to tell you something. I was checking fence lines near Santa Elena Canyon when the call came in on my radio. Sheriff Martinez from Telingua, his voice tight with worry. Charlie, you need to get over to the Ramirez Ranch, pronto. We got a situation here that don't make no sense. The Ramirez place sat about 10 miles from the river, a small cattle operation that had been in the family for 3 generations. Old Miguel Ramirez was tough as leather and twice as smart. If something had him spooked enough to call the law, it was serious. I drove out there in my Park Service truck, dust trailing behind me like a brown ghost. The ranch house looked normal. Enough low, adobe walls, corrugated metal roof, a few mesquite trees providing shade. But as soon as I stepped out of the truck, I knew something was very wrong. The silence hit me first. No mooing, no horses nickering, no chickens clucking around the yard. Just dead quiet, except for the wind moving through the creosote bushes. And the smell sweet and copper sharp, like the field hospitals in Vietnam where I'd worked as a medic before coming home. Miguel stood by the corral fence, his weathered face pale as I'd ever seen it. Sheriff Martinez was there too, along with Doc Peterson from town. They all looked like they'd seen a ghost. Charlie, Miguel said, his voice shaking. 30 head of cattle, all of them dead, but not dead like you'd expect. I followed them to the north pasture, and what I saw there made my stomach drop. Cattle scattered across about an acre, all lying on their sides like they'd just laid down for a nap. No signs of struggle, no bullet holes, no torn up ground from fighting. They looked almost peaceful, except for their eyes. Those were wide open, staring at nothing. Take a look at this one, Doc Peterson said, kneeling beside a young bull that had been Miguel's pride. Help me roll him over. We turned the animal, and I saw something that made no sense. 2 small holes in the neck, perfectly round, about an inch apart, clean as surgical incisions. But here's what really got me. There wasn't any blood. Not on the ground, not on the animal, nowhere. Doc, what kind of snake makes holes like that? I asked. He shook his head. No snake I ever seen. These punctures go deep, real deep. But there's something else. Charlie, this animal's been drained blood, every drop of it. But the body's intact, organs all there. It's like something just ... sucked it all out. I walked among the dead cattle, my medic training kicking in automatically. Same puncture wounds on every animal, same impossible absence of blood, same peaceful expression, like they'd never felt a thing. Miguel, you hear anything last night? See anything? The old rancher shook his head. That's the thing, Charlie. Wasn't no noise at all. My dogs didn't even bark. Found them this morning hiding under the porch, shaking like leaves. Won't come out, won't eat. It's like they've seen the devil himself. As the sun started setting, painting the mountains red and gold, I felt eyes on me. Not human eyes, something else, watching from the shadows between the rocks. The hair on my arms stood up, and suddenly I was back in the jungle, sensing enemy movement in the trees. "We better head back to town," Sheriff Martinez said. "I'll call the state boys, see what they make of this." But as we walked back to our vehicles, I found something in the dirt that made me stop cold. A footprint, if you could call it that, about the size of a child's foot, but wrong somehow. 3 toes ending in what looked like claws, and a mark behind it, like a tail had dragged. I didn't tell the others about it. Something inside me said to keep quiet, at least until I understood what we were dealing with. But as I drove back to the ranger station that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever had killed those cattle was still out there, watching, waiting, and hungry for more than just cow blood. The next morning brought news that made my coffee taste like ash. 3 more ranches hit during the night. Same story, cattle dead, drained dry, no blood anywhere to be found. Word was spreading fast through the small towns along the border. Some folks were talking about vampires. Others said it was Mexican witches, brewers with a taste for blood. The older Mexican families crossed themselves and whispered about El Chupacabro, the goat sucker. I'd grown up hearing those stories from my grandmother. Creatures that came in the night to drain the life from animals, leaving only empty husks behind. But those were just stories, weren't they? Tales to keep children from wandering off after dark. My radio crackled as I was checking equipment at the station. "Charlie, this is base. We got a hiker missing up near the hot springs. Family reported he didn't come back from a day hike yesterday." The hot springs area was popular with tourists, pools of warm water bubbling up from deep underground, surrounded by towering cliff walls. Beautiful during the day, but not somewhere you'd want to be caught after dark. I grabbed my gear and headed out. The missing hiker was a college kid from Dallas named Tommy Martinez, no relation to our sheriff. 22 years old, experienced backpacker, the kind who usually knew better than to push his luck. His car was still parked at the trailhead, keys locked inside. I followed the main trail toward the springs, looking for any sign of where he might have gone off the beaten path. The desert was starting to heat up, even though it was barely 10 in the morning. Lizards skittered across the rocks, and somewhere high above, a hawk circled on the thermals. About halfway to the springs, I found his backpack sitting beside the trail, not dropped or thrown, placed, like someone had carefully set it down and walked away. Inside were all the usual hiking supplies: water, energy bars, first aid kit, camera, nothing missing except Tommy himself. That's when I heard it, soft and high-pitched, almost like singing, coming from a side canyon I'd never explored. The sound made my skin crawl, reminded me of the noise wounded soldiers made when the morphine wasn't enough. Pain mixed with something else around. Maybe. I followed the sound up a narrow wash between red rock walls. The singing got louder as I climbed, echoing off the stone in ways that made it hard to tell where it was coming from. Then, as I rounded a bend, I saw him. Tommy was sitting against a boulder, head tilted back, eyes open but not seeing anything. He was alive. I could see his chest moving up and down, but something was terribly wrong. His skin was white as paper, lips blue like he'd been swimming in ice water. "Tommy," I called out, rushing to his side. "Tommy, can you hear me?" He turned his head toward me, slow as molasses, and tried to speak. Only a whisper came out. It was beautiful, so beautiful, the eyes. That's when I saw the marks on his neck, same to puncture wounds I'd seen on the cattle, but these were still slowly bleeding. Not much, just a trickle, like a leaky faucet. I pressed my fingers to his wrist, checking his pulse, weak and thready, like his heart was barely managing to keep going. "What happened, son? What did this to you?" Tommy's eyes focused on me. For just a moment, red eyes, like looking into hell. But I couldn't move, couldn't run. It was like it told my body to stay still, and my body had to obey. I keyed my radio, calling for a medical evacuation. While I waited, I did what I could, checked his vitals, tried to keep him conscious, looked for signs of other injuries, but the strangest thing was his blood. What little was still flowing from the puncture wounds was dark, almost black, and it was warmer than blood should be. The helicopter arrived within an hour, and we got Tommy airlifted to the hospital in Alpine. Doc Peterson called me that evening with an update that made no sense. "Charlie, I've been practicing medicine for 30 years, and I ain't never seen anything like this. That boy's lost about 60% of his blood. but he's still conscious, still talking, should be dead, by all rights. But here's the weird part, his blood work shows something I can't explain. What kind of something? Hormone levels off the charts. Endorphins, serotonin, dopamine, all the feel-good chemicals your brain makes. It's like he was drugged, but not with anything I can identify. And Charlie ... He keeps asking when he can. Go back. Back where? Back to where it happened. Says he needs to see those red eyes again. We had to restrain him twice tonight to keep him from trying to walk out of the hospital in his gown. After I hung up, I sat on my porch as the sun set over the Chizos Mountains. The desert was coming alive with its night sounds, owls hooting, coyotes starting their evening chorus, the rustle of small creatures moving through the brush, normal sounds, safe sounds. But underneath it all, I swear I could hear something else. That same high-pitched singing I'd heard in the canyon, distant and haunting. Somewhere out there in the darkness, something was watching the lights of my little ranger station, waiting for the right moment to come closer. I checked my service weapon, made sure it was loaded. Not that bullets would probably help against whatever was out there, but holding the familiar weight of the gun made me feel a little less helpless. As I was about to go inside, I heard my neighbor's dog start barking frantically, then stop all at once, just like Miguel's dogs had done. Dead silence where there should have been noise. That's when I knew whatever had taken Tommy's blood wasn't done feeding, and tomorrow night it would be hungry again. The third night was when everything went to hell. I was patrolling the back roads near Buquilas Canyon, checking on some of the more remote ranches. The Hernandez family had called in worried about their livestock, acting strange, horses refusing to go into the barn, goats bunched up in the corner of their pen, all facing the same direction, like they were watching something in the darkness. It was past midnight when I saw the lights, not headlights or flashlights, but something else, a soft red glow moving through the mesquite, about half a mile off the road. I stopped my truck and grabbed my binoculars, but by the time I got them focused, the lights were gone. That's when I heard Maria Hernandez screaming. I gunned the truck down their dirt driveway, radio in one hand, steering wheel in the other. Base, this is Charlie. I need backup at the Hernandez ranch, now. The ranch house was lit up like Christmas, every light on. I could see people running around inside, shadows moving frantically behind the curtains. As I pulled up, Eduardo Hernandez came running out of the house carrying a shotgun. Charlie, gracias a Dios, it's got Maria. What's got her? Where is she? The barn. That thing. It took her to the barn. We ran across the yard together, our flashlight beams bouncing wildly. The barn door was standing wide open, creaking back and forth in the wind. From inside came that sound I was starting to know too well, the high-pitched singing, like a lullaby made of pain. I drew my weapon and stepped into the barn. The smell hit me immediately, that sweet, coppery scent of blood, but stronger now, mixed with something else, something rotten and alien. Maria was in the back stall, sitting in the straw like Tommy had been sitting against that rock. But she was awake, alert, looking right at us, smiling. Maria. Eduardo started toward his wife, but I grabbed his arm. Wait, something's not right. That's when I saw it. Crouched behind Maria, almost invisible in the shadows, was something that made my brain refuse to process what my eyes were seeing. About 4 feet tall, grayish-green skin that seemed to shift and shimmer in the flashlight beam. Long arms ending in hands with too many joints, and the eyes bright red, like looking into a forge fire. But it wasn't the appearance that froze me. It was the intelligence in those eyes. This wasn't some mindless beast. It was studying us, calculating, deciding what to do with the new arrivals at its feeding time. Eduardo, I said quietly, back toward the door, nice and slow. But Maria spoke up, her voice dreamy and distant. No, don't go. It's beautiful, Eduardo. You should see how beautiful it is. Come closer. The thing behind her made a sound, not quite a purr, not quite a growl. Its mouth opened, and I saw rows of needle-sharp teeth. But it was the tongue that made my stomach turn, long and black, with what looked like a hollow tip, like a mosquito's proboscis, but the size of a snake. It doesn't hurt, Maria continued, still smiling. It feels good, like floating, like dreaming. You should try it. Me more. That's when Eduardo lost it. He raised his shotgun and fired both barrels at the creature. The sound was deafening in the enclosed space, and the muzzle flash lit up the whole barn like lightning. But the thing wasn't there anymore. Somehow, In the split second between Eduardo pulling the trigger and the shot hitting, it had moved. Not just moved, vanished like smoke in the wind. Where did it go? Eduardo shouted, frantically trying to reload. Where is it? I swept my flashlight around the barn, weapon ready. Nothing. Just empty stalls, bales of hay, and Maria sitting in the straw looking confused, like she was waking up from a deep sleep. Then I heard a scraping sound from above. I looked up just as the creature dropped from the rafters onto Eduardo's back. He went down hard, shotgun flying, and the thing immediately sank its proboscis into his neck. Eduardo's scream cut off almost instantly. His whole body went rigid for a moment, then completely relaxed. The creature was feeding, and Ed's face took on the same peaceful expression I'd seen on Tommy, on Maria, on all the drained cattle. I fired 3 shots at the thing, aiming for center mass. At least one hit. I saw it jerk and hiss, but it didn't let go. If anything, it seemed to feed faster, like it was in a hurry now. Get off him, I yelled, and charged forward. That's when those red eyes turned on me, and suddenly, I couldn't move. My legs just stopped working, like someone had unplugged my brain from my body. I could see, could hear, could think, but I couldn't make my muscles obey my commands. The creature finished with Eduardo and turned toward me, wiping dark liquid from its mouth. Not blood, something else, something that hissed when it hit the ground. It stood up on its hind legs, and I got my first clear look at the thing that had been terrorizing the border. It was like someone had tried to build a person but got the proportions all wrong. Too tall, too thin, joints bending in directions that made my eyes hurt to follow. The skin wasn't quite skin, more like wet leather, covered in a film that caught the light like oil on water. And those hands, 5 fingers, but each one ending in a claw that looked sharp enough to cut glass. But it was the intelligence in its face that scared me most. This wasn't some animal following instinct. It was thinking, planning, enjoying what it was doing. It took a step toward me, and I felt that paralysis getting stronger. My vision started to blur at the edges, and a strange warmth spread through my chest. Part of me, the part that was still thinking clearly, realized this was how it worked. The paralysis, the peaceful feeling, the euphoria Tommy and Maria had described. This thing didn't just drain blood. It drugged its victims first, made them want to be drained. But then something changed. Maybe it was my military training, or maybe it was pure stubborn anger, but I felt the paralysis crack just a little, like finding a loose thread in a rope. I focused all my will on moving just 1 finger, then 2, then my whole hand. The creature cocked its head, confused. This wasn't how its victims usually behaved. I raised my gun and emptied the remaining rounds into its center. This time I saw the bullets hit, saw dark fluid spray from the wounds. The thing let out a shriek like a steam whistle and stumbled backward. That's when the cavalry arrived. Sheriff Martinez and 2 deputies burst through the barn door, guns drawn. The creature looked at them, looked at me, then made a sound I'll never forget, like laughter, but wrong somehow. It leaped straight up, grabbed onto one of the roof beams, and punched through the barn roof like it was made of paper. By the time we got outside, it was gone. Just red eyes glowing in the distance, moving fast toward the border. Eduardo was unconscious but alive. Maria was confused and weak but walking. And I was standing there realizing that everything I thought I knew about the world had just been turned upside down. Something was living in our desert. Something that fed on blood and fear, and the very life force of its victims. Something smart, enough to avoid our traps, and strong enough to tear through a roof. And now it knew that I could fight back, which meant next time, it would be ready for me. The lunar eclipse was 3 days away when Tommy Martinez disappeared from the hospital. Doc Peterson called me at dawn, voice shaking. "Charlie, you need to get over here. That hiker we brought in, he's gone." But that ain't the worst part. I found the doctor standing in Tommy's room, staring at the window. It was on the 3rd floor, and the window was open. Not broken open from the inside. Security cameras show him getting out of bed around 3 a.m., Doc said. Walked to the window, opened it, and just stepped out like he was taking a stroll in the park. 3 stories up. He should be dead. That's what I thought. But Charlie, look at this. He led me to the window and pointed down at the parking lot below. There, in the dirt beside the hospital, was a perfect outline of a human body. But no blood, no broken bones, nothing. Just the impression of someone who had landed soft as a feather. "And there's something else," Doc said. handing me a note written in Tommy's handwriting. He left this on his pillow. The note was short. Gone to feed the red eyes. Don't try to find me. This is what I was born for. I spent the rest of that day tracking Tommy's trail. It wasn't hard. He was walking barefoot through the desert, heading straight toward the border. But what worried me was that his footprints weren't alone. Other tracks were following him. The three-toed prints I'd seen at the Ramirez Ranch, but bigger now, and there were more of them. As the sun set, I found myself at the edge of a canyon I'd never seen before. Even after 7 years of patrolling this desert, the walls were covered in old pictographs, ancient drawings of figures with red eyes and long tongues, surrounded by smaller human shapes. At the bottom of the canyon, I could see the glow of a fire. I climbed down carefully, service weapon in one hand, flashlight in the other. The canyon was deeper than it looked from above, and the walls seemed to close in as I descended. By the time I reached the bottom, I was breathing hard, and my shirt was soaked with sweat. The fire was in a natural amphitheater carved into the rock, and around it, sitting in a circle like they were at some kind of ceremony, were people. I recognized Tommy immediately, still wearing his hospital gown. But there were others, men and women from the local ranchers, some I knew by name. All of them had the same peaceful expression, the same dreamy smile. And moving among them, like a shepherd tending his flock, was the creature. In the firelight, I could see it more clearly than ever before. Its skin was covered in scars, and what looked like ritualistic markings. Around its neck hung a necklace made of small bones, bird bones, maybe, or from something even smaller. And its eyes. Those red eyes held an intelligence that was ancient and hungry and completely alien. It saw me watching and gestured for me to come closer. When I didn't move, it made that laughing sound again and spoke. Not with its mouth, but directly into my mind. Asterisk, you interest me, Ranger. Your mind has walls where others have opened doors, but walls can be broken. Asterisk, I felt pressure behind my eyes, like someone was trying to push their way into my skull. The paralysis started again, but this time I was ready for it. I thought about Vietnam, about patching up wounded soldiers under enemy fire, about staying focused when everything around me was falling apart. The pressure eased, and I heard surprise in the creature's mental voice. Asterisk, you have seen much death, tasted much fear. This makes you ... seasoned, like good meat, that has been aged. Asterisk, what do you want? I said out loud. Asterisk, what I have always wanted. To feed. Your people provide such rich sustenance, not just blood, but dreams, hopes, the very essence of life itself. And in 3 days, when the moon turns red, the feeding will reach its peak. Asterisk, that's when I understood. The eclipse wasn't just timing, was power. This thing, whatever it was, drew strength from the blood moon, and it had been collecting victims, saving them up like a spider saves flies in its web. You could join them, it continued. Asterisk, your will is strong, but even the strongest walls crumble eventually, and the reward. Such bliss you cannot imagine. To float forever in dreams of red light, feeling nothing but peace. Asterisk, one of the seated figures, a woman I recognized as Alina Santos from the post office, turned to look at me. Her smile was beatific, like she'd found the answer to every question she'd ever had. It's beautiful here, Charlie, she said softly. No pain, no worry, no fear, just peace, forever and ever. I looked around the circle of faces, all wearing that same expression of complete contentment. These weren't victims anymore, they were converts, and part of me, the part that still woke up screaming from Vietnam nightmares, wondered what it would be like to just let go. But then I thought about Maria Hernandez, confused and frightened after her encounter, about Eduardo, unconscious in a hospital bed, about all the families who'd lost livestock, who were afraid to let their children play outside after dark. No, I said, raising my gun. Whatever you are, wherever you came from, this ends now. The creature tilted its head, studying me like I was a puzzle it couldn't quite solve. As you wish, it said. Asterisk, but know this, when the moon bleeds tomorrow night, I will come for you, and your strong walls will become your prison, trapping you with your fears while I drain you drop by drop. Asterisk, it made a gesture, and the people around the fire stood up in unison. Tommy, Elena, and half a dozen others I'd known my whole life. They turned toward me, still smiling, and began walking forward. I couldn't shoot them. They were innocent, controlled by that thing's influence, but I couldn't let them catch me, either. So I did the only thing I could think of. I pulled the pin from a smoke grenade and threw it into the fire. Thick white smoke billowed out, filling the canyon. In the confusion, I heard the creature hiss with anger, and the controlled people began moving around randomly, bumping into each other, their coordination broken. I ran, scrambled up the canyon wall faster than I'd ever climbed anything in my life, driven by pure terror and adrenaline. Behind me, I could hear that thing shrieking, its mental voice clawing at the edges of my mind. By the time I reached my truck, my hands were shaking so bad I could barely get the key in the ignition, but I made it back to town, and I spent the rest of the night making calls to the sheriff, to the border patrol, to anyone who would listen, because tomorrow night, when the moon turned red, that thing was coming for me, and this time, I had to be ready. The eclipse began at 11:47 p.m. I was waiting for it in the abandoned ranger station on the south end of the park, the one that had been closed for 5 years due to budget cuts. I'd spent all day preparing boarding up windows, setting up floodlights powered by a portable generator, laying out every weapon I could get my hands on, not just my service pistol, but a hunting rifle, a shotgun borrowed from Sheriff Martinez, and even an old flare gun I'd found in the emergency supplies. None of it would probably help, but it made me feel like I was doing something. As the Earth's shadow crept across the moon, turning it from silver to orange to deep red, I felt the air change. The desert went quiet, no coyotes, no owls, no insects buzzing around the lights. Even the wind died down to nothing. It was like the whole world was holding its breath. That's when I heard the singing again, soft at first, barely audible, but growing stronger as the moon grew redder, and underneath it, something else, footsteps, lots of them, moving in perfect unison. I looked out through a gap in the boarded windows and saw them coming across the desert. The missing people from the canyon, walking in a straight line toward the station. Tommy was in the lead, still wearing that hospital gown, his bare feet, leaving bloody prints on the rocky ground. Behind him came Alina and the Morales family from down near Boquillas, and others I recognized from around town. And behind them all, moving like liquid shadow in the red moonlight, was the creature. It had changed since our encounter in the canyon, grown larger, more solid, like the eclipse was feeding it power. Its skin now gleamed like metal, and those red eyes burned brighter than the moon itself. Around its neck, the bone necklace had grown 2 more bones, bigger bones, human bones. I keyed the radio, hoping someone was listening. "This is Ranger Mendoza at the Old South Station. I've got approximately 15 people approaching my position, but they're not. They're not in control of themselves, and there's something else with them, something not human." Static answered me. The thing had probably knocked out the radio tower. The controlled people spread out around the building, surrounding it completely. They didn't speak, didn't make any sound, except for their breathing. They just stood there, waiting, while the creature approached the front door. "Come out, Ranger," its voice whispered in my mind. Asterisk, "You have given me more trouble than any human in many years. I am ... curious about you. Come out, and I will make your death quick. Asterisk, go to hell," I called back, though I wasn't sure if it could hear my voice or just my thoughts. Hell, I felt its amusement like ice water in my veins. Asterisk, "Child, I have been to places that would make your hell seem like paradise. I have fed on worlds where the screaming never stops, where the blood flows in rivers, where fear is the only currency that matters. Your little desert, your little planet, these are just snacks along the way." Asterisk, the front door exploded inward, torn off its hinges like it was made of paper. The creature stepped through, having to duck slightly to fit. Through the doorway, up close, in the harsh light of my floods, it was even more terrifying than I'd imagined. Its skin wasn't just scarred, it was covered in symbols that seemed to move when I wasn't looking directly at them. And its mouth, when it smiled, I saw not just the needle teeth but something worse. Other mouths, smaller ones, opening and closing along its throat. "What are you?" I asked, surprising myself by how steady my voice sounded. "I am hunger," it replied. Asterisk, "I am the space between heartbeats, the pause between breaths. I am what your ancestors feared in the darkness before they learned to make fire. And I am very, very old." Asterisk, it took a step closer, and I felt that familiar paralysis starting to creep up my legs. But this time was different. This time, instead of fighting it, I let myself remember. Not the war that was too recent, too raw. Instead, I thought about my grandmother's stories, about creatures that fed on fear and blood, and the ways people had learned to fight them. Salt and silver, I whispered, reaching into my pocket. The creature paused, those red eyes narrowing. Asterisk, what did you say? I pulled out the handful of silver coins I'd bought from the jewelry store in Alpine, each one wrapped with salt from my grandmother's old wooden box. She always said the old ways worked best against old things. I threw the salt-wrapped silver at the creature, and where it touched, the thing's skin began to smoke and hiss. It let out a shriek that shattered two of my floodlights and sent me to my knees, hands pressed to my ears. But it worked. The paralysis broke, and I could move again. I grabbed the flare gun and fired it directly into the creature's center mass. The phosphorus burst into brilliant red flame, and suddenly the thing wasn't so solid anymore. It flickered like a bad TV signal, and I realized something important. It was stronger during the eclipse, but it was also more vulnerable. The extra power came with a cost. Impossible, it snarled, beating at the flames. Asterisk, no human knows the old ways anymore. No human remembers. Asterisk, my grandmother remembered, I said, loading another flare, and she taught me. This time, I aimed for its head. The flare struck right between those burning red eyes, and the creature's scream was like every nightmare I'd ever had given voice. It stumbled backward, clawing at its face, and I saw something I'd never thought I'd see: fear in those ancient eyes outside. The controlled people began to collapse, falling to their knees as whatever hold the thing had over them started to weaken. I could hear them crying, confused and scared, finally waking up from their blood-drunk dreams. The creature looked at me one last time, and I felt its voice in my head, fainter now but full of promise. Asterisk, this is not over, Ranger. I am wounded, not dead. I will heal, I will return, and when I do, I will remember your face, your scent, the taste of your defiance. Asterisk, it turned and leaped through the window I'd been looking out earlier, shattering the remaining boards. By the time I got outside, it was gone, leaving only smoking footprints in the dirt. The eclipse was ending, the moon returning to its normal silver color, and around the ranger station, 15 people were slowly coming back to themselves, looking around in confusion and terror. I spent the rest of that night helping them, getting them warm, calling for medical help, trying to explain what had happened without sounding completely insane. Tommy Martinez was the worst off he'd been under the creature's influence the longest, and it would be months before he was anything close to normal again. By dawn, the official story was set. Gas leak at an abandoned research facility across the border, hallucinogenic effects, mass hysteria, the kind of explanation that lets people sleep at night without wondering what else might be out there in the darkness. But I knew the truth. That thing, that chupacabra for lack of a better word, was still alive, hurt, maybe hiding, but not gone. And sooner or later, it would heal. It would get hungry again, and it would remember the human who had fought back. I retired from the Park Service 6 months later. Officially, it was due to injuries sustained in the line of duty. The paralysis had left me with some permanent nerve damage, and the nightmares were getting worse instead of better. But really, I just couldn't do the job anymore, knowing what was out there. These days, I live in a small house in Terlingua, and I keep my grandmother's old books close at hand. I've learned more about the old ways, the protections and weapons that work against things that shouldn't exist. And every month, when the moon is dark, I patrol the desert with salt and silver and prayers in languages older than English, because the people who live out here deserve someone watching over them, someone who knows that the darkness isn't empty, and that some hungers can never truly be satisfied. The creature hasn't come back yet, but it will, and when it does, I'll be ready. After all, some jobs never really end. They just change shape, like shadows at sunset, stretching longer and darker as the light fades away. But that's a story for another night, when the moon is red and the desert sings its hungry song.